Hey Ranger Screams family, I'm really sorry for the long message. I just want to be honest with you. My channel has been seriously affected because of people copying my content, my editing, stories, videos, and thumbnails. It's been really hard for me. I've built this channel with over 4,000 of you, and that means everything to me. Because of that, I created a new channel. I will still continue posting on both channels, but I really need your support in this step. I'm waiting for you. I truly need your help right now. Please come with me and subscribe to the new channel. The link is in the pinned comment. Thank you for everything. I work as a ranger here in Arizona, and after 5 years of guiding tourists and warning them about the dangers of dehydration, I figured it was time to experience the Grand Canyon properly myself. So this past October, I decided to take advantage of the cooler temperatures and fewer crowds to embark on a solo backpacking trip. The morning of my departure, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, examining my appearance with amusement. I had put on the most conservative clothes I could find. Khaki pants with too many pockets, a faded olive green shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that made me look like I was auditioning for a National Geographic documentary. My logic was simple: I would blend into the landscape better this way. I did not even shave for 3 days before the trip, sporting what I generously called a beard, but what was really just patchy facial hair. "Look at you, Ryan," I said to my reflection. "The perfect camouflage. Now the rattlesnakes won't even notice you're there." I was kidding, of course, just trying to make myself laugh and ease the slight nervousness I felt about heading into the canyon alone. My colleagues had raised their eyebrows when I mentioned going solo, but I'd brushed off their concerns. I had a 3-day permit, plenty of supplies, and more knowledge of the terrain than most visitors could dream of. My supervisor, Martin, had given me a satellite phone just in case, along with a knowing look. "Even rangers can get lost, Ryan," he'd said, handing me the device. "Or break a leg. Or run into a mountain lion. Or—" I get it, I'd interrupted, taking the phone. "But remember, I've been telling tourists how to survive out there for 5 years. I think I can handle myself." "Just don't become one of those cautionary tales we tell at orientation," Martin had replied with a wry smile. As I finished packing my gear into my trusty backpack, a weathered companion for many previous adventures, I ran through my mental checklist one last time. Water purification tablets, first aid kit, map, compass, headlamp, food supplies for 4 days, 1 extra just in case, sleeping bag, lightweight tent, sunscreen, and the satellite phone, all accounted for. The drive to the South Rim took about 2 hours from my small apartment in Flagstaff. As the landscape gradually transformed around me, I felt that familiar sense of awe beginning to stir. No matter how many times I'd seen the Grand Canyon, its immensity never failed to humble me. Over a mile deep, up to 18 miles wide, and stretching for 277 miles, it was a testament to the inexorable power of water and time. The Colorado River cutting through layer upon layer of rock over millions of years. When I arrived at the trailhead, the parking lot was surprisingly empty. October weekdays were typically quiet, but this was even more deserted than I'd expected. Perfect. I slung my backpack over my shoulders, adjusted the straps, and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The temperature was ideal for hiking, cool enough to prevent overheating, but warm enough that I wouldn't need heavy layers. The Bright Angel Trail stretched before me, zigzagging its way down into the vastness below. This would be my path today, a 9.5-mile journey that would take me to the bottom of the canyon where I'd spend my first night at Bright Angel Campground. I checked my watch, 7:30 a.m., plenty of time to make it down before dark. The first mile was easy, a gentle descent that lulled many inexperienced hikers into a false sense of security. I passed a few day hikers making their way to the first rest stop, nodding politely as I went. Most were appropriately equipped, I noted with professional approval. A middle-aged couple asked me to take their picture with the canyon as a backdrop, and I obliged, smiling as they posed with their arms around each other. "Are you going all the way down?" the woman asked, noticing my loaded backpack. "Yep, spending a few days exploring," I replied. "Alone?" Her husband looked concerned. I tapped the ranger emblem on my shirt. "It's kind of my job to know what I'm doing out here." They laughed, and we parted ways. As I continued downward, The trail became steeper, the switchbacks more pronounced. The vastness of the canyon began to reveal itself with each step, layer upon layer of rock telling the Earth's story. Vishnu schist at the bottom, nearly 2 billion years old, followed by younger and younger formations. Zoroaster granite, Tepete sandstone, Bright Angel shale, Muav limestone, and many more, each a chapter in the planet's history. By midday I had reached the 3-mile rest house, where I stopped to eat lunch and rest my legs. The sun was high now, casting sharp shadows across the rugged terrain. I drank deeply from my water bottle, mindful of staying hydrated. Dehydration was the #1 problem tourists faced in the canyon, and I wasn't about to fall victim to it myself. As I sat on a rock, munching on a protein bar, I noticed a strange silence had fallen over the area. The birds had stopped chirping, and the usual distant sounds of hikers' voices had disappeared. For a moment the canyon seemed to be holding its breath. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the day. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the silence broke. A raven cawed overhead, its black silhouette stark against the blue sky. I shook off the momentary unease. Working as a ranger, I'd heard plenty of stories about the canyon. Tales of mysterious disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and ancient Native American legends. Most were just that, stories, fabrications designed to add mystique to an already awe-inspiring landscape. I continued my descent, passing Indian Garden, an oasis of cottonwood trees and flowing water about halfway down the canyon. Here I refilled my water bottles and chatted briefly with a park volunteer staffing the small ranger station. "Not many people heading down today," I commented. The volunteer, an older man with sun-weathered skin named Bill, nodded. "Been quiet all week. You staying at Phantom Ranch?" "Bright Angel Campground," I replied. "Got a 3-day permit." Bill's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "Good time of year for it. Nights are getting cooler though. You'll want that sleeping bag." "Any wildlife activity I should know about?" I asked, more out of professional courtesy than actual concern. Bill hesitated, just for a second. "Nothing unusual, just the standard warnings about not feeding the squirrels and keeping your food secure from ringtails." Something in his tone made me curious. "Nothing else?" He shrugged. "Well, couple of hikers came through yesterday claiming they saw something big moving on the north rim, probably just a mule deer or an elk. You know how people get when they're tired and the light's playing tricks?" I nodded, though I couldn't help but feel there was something he wasn't telling me. But I didn't push it. Every ranger had their own collection of strange reports and unexplained sightings, most of which had perfectly rational explanations when investigated properly. The final stretch to the bottom of the canyon was the most grueling, despite being on what we rangers jokingly called the tourist trail. My legs were beginning to feel the strain of the constant downhill trek. The trail wound through an area called the Devil's Corkscrew, a series of tight switchbacks that descended steeply through the inner canyon's Vishnu schist. As the afternoon wore on, the canyon walls began to cast long shadows, and the temperature dropped noticeably. I pushed on, eager to reach the campground before dark. The sound of the Colorado River grew louder as I approached, a constant rushing reminder of the force that had carved this magnificent gorge. When I finally crossed the Silver Bridge spanning the Colorado River, the day was waning. The mighty river churned below, a muddy green-brown serpent twisting through the ancient rock. On the other side, Bright Angel Campground awaited, a collection of designated campsites nestled alongside Bright Angel Creek, a tributary of the Colorado. I checked in with the ranger on duty, showed my permit, and made my way to my assigned site. A few other campers were already settled in, their tents pitched and small cooking stoves flickering in the growing dusk. I nodded greetings as I passed, but kept to myself, eager to set up camp and rest my tired muscles. My site was at the far end of the campground, offering a bit more privacy than the others. I efficiently set up my tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, and organized my gear. Years of experience had made the process almost automatic. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I paused to scan the surrounding area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the towering canyon walls, now turned a deep red by the setting sun, and the scattered trees and bushes of the riparian zone. With my camp established, I fired up my small stove to heat water for my freeze-dried dinner, beef stroganoff, a luxury in backcountry meals. As I waited for the water to boil, I pulled out my journal and began to record the day's journey, noting the trail conditions, wildlife sightings, or lack thereof, and my own physical condition after the hike. The light faded quickly at the bottom of the canyon, the walls cutting off the sun long before true sunset. I switched on my headlamp and continued writing as I ate my rehydrated meal. Around me, the sounds of the night began to emerge, the constant rush of Bright Angel Creek, the occasional call of a night bird, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, and then something else, a sound I couldn't immediately identify. A low, rumbling groan that seemed to come from the darkness beyond the campground. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, and listened intently. The sound came again, longer this time, like the moan of something large and in pain. My ranger training kicked in, and I mentally cataloged the possible sources. It could be an injured elk or deer, perhaps a mountain lion, though they rarely vocalized so loudly. Maybe even a black bear, though they were uncommon in the inner canyon. Whatever it was, it sounded distant enough not to pose an immediate threat. Still, I secured my food in the provided metal storage box, no sense in attracting wildlife to my campsite, and made sure my bear spray was within easy reach before crawling into my tent. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. The strange sound had triggered something primal in me, a weariness that kept me alert despite my body's demand for rest. And when I finally did drift off, my dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures that moved just at the edge of my vision, and deep echoing groans that reverberated through the canyon walls. I woke several times during the night, each time convinced I'd heard something moving outside my tent. But when I listened, there was only the wind and the water. By the time dawn arrived, I was groggy and unsettled, wondering if the isolation was already getting to me. Just one night in, and I was jumping at shadows like a first-time camper. I shook my head at my own foolishness as I emerged from my tent into the cool morning air. The canyon was beautiful in the early light, the walls glowing with subtle hues of pink and gold. Whatever strange anxieties had plagued me during the night seemed absurd in the clarity of day. Still, as I prepared my breakfast and planned my day hike along the river trail, I couldn't completely shake the feeling that something was out there in the vastness of the canyon, something watching and waiting with ancient patience. After a breakfast of instant oatmeal and strong coffee, I packed my day bag with water, snacks, my first aid kit, and a detailed map of the inner canyon trails. Today, I planned to explore the river trail, which would take me along the Colorado toward the Kaibab Bridge and beyond. Nothing too strenuous. I wanted to save my energy for the climb out on the third day. The morning was perfect for hiking, cool and clear with a slight breeze that carried the earthy scent of the river. As I set out from the campground, I nodded to the few other early risers who were starting their day. Most were preparing for the ascent back to the rim, their faces showing a mix of determination and apprehension at the climb ahead. "Beautiful day for it," I remarked to an older couple who were meticulously checking their gear. "Is it ever not beautiful down here?" The woman replied with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Fair point," I conceded. "Heading up today?" The man nodded, adjusting his hat. "South Kaibab Trail, shorter but steeper, they say." "That's right. Take it slow and steady. The views are worth stopping for anyway." I gave them the same advice I'd given countless tourists over the years. "You rangers ever get tired of this place?" the woman asked, gesturing to the magnificent surroundings. I laughed. "That would be like getting tired of breathing. The canyon changes every day, the light, the colors, the mood. It's never the same place twice." We chatted for a few more minutes before I wished them luck and continued on my way. The river trail was less traveled than the corridor trails, offering a more solitary experience. It followed the Colorado River's north bank, providing stunning views of the water and the towering canyon walls. As I walked, I kept my eyes open for wildlife. The inner canyon was home to a diverse ecosystem despite its harsh conditions, Desert bighorn sheep sometimes appeared on the rocky slopes, while peregrine falcons soared overhead hunting for prey. Closer to the ground, lizards basked on sun-warmed rocks and various rodents scurried through the sparse vegetation. About a mile into my hike, I spotted movement on a ledge above the trail. A desert bighorn ram, his massive curved horns identifying him immediately. He stood motionless, watching me with alert eyes. I stopped to admire him, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. For a long moment, we regarded each other across the gulf of species, two beings sharing this ancient space. Then something spooked him. His head jerked up, ears twitching, before he bounded away with surprising agility for such a large animal. I frowned, wondering what had startled him. I hadn't moved, and there was no one else on the trail as far as I could see. A prickle of unease ran down my neck. I turned slowly, scanning the area behind me. Nothing but empty trail and canyon wall, yet the feeling of being observed persisted, an invisible pressure like the weight of eyes on my back. "Get it together, Ryan," I muttered to myself. Too many campfire stories. I continued along the trail, but now I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, noticing every shadow and sound. The canyon seemed to have grown quieter, the usual calls of birds strangely absent. Even the river's constant rush seemed muted somehow, as if the water itself was trying to move unnoticed. The trail narrowed as it wound around a protruding section of cliff face. As I navigated this tighter passage, my boot dislodged a small stone that tumbled down toward the river. I watched its descent, oddly mesmerized by such a simple thing, and then I saw it. A flash of movement below, near the water's edge. Something large and dark, moving with purpose before disappearing behind a boulder. My heart rate spiked. Whatever it was far bigger than a coyote or a ringtail. A bear, perhaps. They were rare in the inner canyon, but not unheard of. I carefully made my way to a vantage point where I could see the area better, but there was nothing there. No tracks in the soft sand by the river's edge, no movement among the scattered vegetation. Had I imagined it? The rational part of my mind, the trained ranger part, suggested it was probably just a shadow cast by a cloud passing overhead. Or maybe a large bird like a raven that my peripheral vision had misinterpreted. The less rational part wondered if it was something else entirely. I checked my watch and realized I'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours. The sun was higher now, and the temperature was rising. I decided to find a shady spot for a rest and a snack before turning back. No sense pushing too far on the first full day. A large boulder near the trail offered adequate shade, and I settled against it, drinking deeply from my water bottle. The river churned below, its waters a mixture of brown and green, carrying sediment from hundreds of miles upstream. I unwrapped a granola bar and took a bite, appreciating the simple pleasure of food after exertion. As I ate, I pulled out my journal again and began to note down my observations from the morning's hike. I mentioned the bighorn sheep and its sudden flight, as well as the strange dark shape I thought I'd seen. Writing it down made it seem less significant, just another entry in a ranger's field notes. I was about to put the journal away when I noticed something odd about the boulder I was leaning against. There were markings on it, not natural erosion patterns, but deliberate carvings. I shifted position to get a better look. The markings were petroglyphs, ancient rock art created by the indigenous peoples who had inhabited the canyon long before European contact. I'd seen many examples throughout the park, but I didn't recall any being documented in this specific location. These particular images were unusual. Most Grand Canyon petroglyphs depicted animals, hunting scenes, or abstract geometric patterns, but these showed what appeared to be a series of tall, elongated figures with disproportionately large heads. They stood in a line, facing what looked like a much larger figure with extended arms. I traced the carvings with my fingertips, feeling the shallow grooves in the stone. How old were they? 500 years? 1,000? And what did they represent? A tribal ceremony? A mythological story? Or something the artists had actually witnessed? A sudden gust of wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it a sound that might have been a distant wail. I jerked upright, all senses alert. But there was nothing, just the wind and the river and the ancient silent rock. I took a quick photo of the petroglyphs with my phone, making a mental note to report them to the park's archaeological team. Unrecorded petroglyphs were always of interest, both scientifically and culturally. The discovery had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I packed up my things and began the hike back to the campground, moving at a brisker pace than before. The sun was directly overhead now, casting few shadows and baking the exposed trail. I kept my hat pulled low to shield my eyes and drank regularly from my water bottle, mindful of the heat. About halfway back, I paused at a bend in the trail that offered a particularly spectacular view of the canyon. The layered walls rose in a symphony of color: reds, oranges, purples, and browns, each stratum telling its part of the Earth's story. It was humbling to stand there, a tiny human figure in a landscape shaped by forces operating on a timescale that made our entire species seem like a fleeting moment. As I stood there contemplating geological time, a movement caught my eye far across the canyon. On the opposite rim, barely visible at this distance, was what appeared to be a figure. It seemed to be standing right at the edge, looking down into the abyss. I squinted, trying to make out details, but it was too far away. It could have been a tourist taking in the view, a park employee, or even just an oddly shaped juniper tree that my mind was interpreting as human-like. Yet something about its stillness, its solitary position at the very edge of the precipice, struck me as strange. Then it was gone, either having moved away from the rim or never having been there at all. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if the sun and solitude were beginning to play tricks on me. By the time I returned to Bright Angel Campground, the afternoon was well advanced. More hikers had arrived since morning, and the designated sites were now mostly occupied. The communal area near the ranger cabin was busy with people cooking early dinners or comparing notes on trail conditions. I nodded greetings as I passed through but didn't stop to chat. Instead, I headed straight for my tent, suddenly craving the quiet of my own space. Inside, I stretched out on my sleeping bag and closed my eyes, allowing my muscles to relax after the morning's exertion. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the quality of light filtering through the tent fabric had changed. It was the golden hour, that magical time just before sunset when everything is bathed in warm light. I emerged from my tent feeling refreshed. My momentary unease from the trail had faded, replaced by the simple pleasure of being in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. I retrieved my dinner from the storage box and set about preparing it, this time opting for a dehydrated pasta primavera. As I waited for the water to boil, I noticed a solo hiker setting up camp at a nearby site. He worked efficiently, obviously experienced, and had his tent pitched in minutes. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a trim white beard and the lean, weathered look of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Evening," I called over, raising my hand in greeting. He looked up and nodded. "Evening," he replied. "Perfect night for camping. Can't argue with that. You just come down today?" "Yep, South Kaibab Trail." He secured his rain fly with a final stake. "Name's Mike, by the way." "Ryan," I replied. "I'm a ranger, but off duty at the moment." I gestured to my civilian clothes. Mike's eyebrows rose slightly. "A ranger, huh? Must be nice having this as your office." I laughed. "It has its perks, though I spend more time telling tourists not to feed the squirrels than I do enjoying the view." Mike chuckled and walked over, extending his hand. We shook, and I offered him a seat on the small folding stool I'd brought along. He accepted with a nod of thanks. "So what brings a ranger down here on his own time?" he asked as he settled onto the stool. "Just wanted to experience it properly," I said, stirring my rehydrating dinner. "Been working here 5 years, but it's different when you're not on the clock." Mike nodded understandingly. "Been coming to the canyon for over 30 years myself. Different every time." "That's what I was telling someone this morning," I agreed. Never the same place twice. We fell into easy conversation as I ate my dinner and Mike prepared his own. He was a retired geology professor from Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and his knowledge of the canyon's formation was extensive. I found myself listening more than talking as he explained the nuances of the various rock layers and the geological events that had shaped them. As darkness fell, we were joined by a few other campers who were attracted by our conversation. Someone produced a small flask of whiskey that was passed around, and the talk turned to experiences in the backcountry, The best trails, the most spectacular views, the most challenging conditions. Ever seen anything strange down here? I asked during a lull in the conversation, thinking of the dark shape I'd glimpsed near the river and the odd petroglyphs. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of Bright Angel Creek bubbling nearby. "Define strange," Mike said finally, his voice careful. "I don't know," I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. "Unexplained lights, weird sounds, unusual wildlife behavior, that sort of thing." A younger woman across from me, Sarah, I think she'd said her name was, leaned forward. "My brother swears he saw a mountain lion down here that was twice the normal size. Said it had a face that was almost human. None of us believed him, of course." "Where was this?" I asked. "Somewhere along the Tonto Trail, I think. Few years back." Mike cleared his throat. "There are always stories in places like this. The Hopi and Havasupai have their own legends about the canyon, spirits and entities that dwell in certain places. Sacred sites where the veil between worlds is thin." "You believe in that stuff, Professor?" asked a bearded man whose name I hadn't caught. Mike took a sip from the flask that had made its way back to him. "I believe that humans have an innate need to explain the unexplainable, and that indigenous peoples who lived in harmony with these landscapes for thousands of years might have insights we've lost." The conversation shifted to Native American legends, with various people contributing fragments they'd heard or read. As a ranger, I was familiar with many of these stories, though we were trained to present them respectfully as cultural heritage rather than literal truth. Yet as I listened to the others talk, I found myself thinking about the strange sound I'd heard the previous night, the dark shape by the river, and the unsettling petroglyphs. Was there something to these legends after all? Something that couldn't be easily explained by scientific rationalism? The group gradually dispersed as it grew later, people retreating to their tents for the night. Mike and I were the last ones still sitting there. "You saw something today, didn't you?" he asked quietly once we were alone. "That's why you asked?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Thought I saw something moving near the river. Probably nothing." Mike studied me for a long moment. "The Havasupai speak of a being they call the Tall One that wanders the canyon at night. They say it's been here since before humans, a guardian or a watcher. Not necessarily malevolent, but dangerous to encounter." "And you believe that?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He smiled faintly. "Like I said, I believe people explain things as best they can with the knowledge they have. But I also believe there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." With that cryptic Shakespearean quote, Mike bid me good night and returned to his tent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the vast, dark canyon that suddenly seemed filled with unseen presences. That night I dreamed of tall, elongated figures standing silently along the rim of the canyon, their huge eyes reflecting the starlight as they looked down upon the tiny creatures that scurried along their ancient paths far below. I woke before dawn on my second full day, the remnants of strange dreams still clinging to my consciousness like cobwebs. Outside my tent, the world was painted in shades of deep blue and purple, the canyon walls barely visible silhouettes against the lightening sky. The air was cold and still, with a clarity that only comes in those precious moments before sunrise. I emerged from my sleeping bag, shivering slightly as I pulled on an extra layer. The campground was silent. Most hikers wouldn't be stirring for another hour at least. I liked this time of day best, the solitude, the sense of witnessing the world's awakening. As I lit my stove to boil water for coffee, I contemplated my plan for the day. I would explore the Clear Creek Trail, which branched off from the North Kaibab Trail and offered stunning views of the inner canyon. It was less traveled than the corridor trails, which appealed to me in my current mood. While waiting for the water to boil, I checked my phone out of habit, though I knew there wouldn't be any service at the bottom of the canyon. To my surprise, there was a notification, a text message from Martin, my supervisor. How had that come through? I opened it, curious. "Signal's bad. Call when you can. Something strange happening near your location. Be careful." The timestamp showed it had been sent late the previous evening. My brow furrowed as I stared at the cryptic message. What could be happening that would prompt Martin to try to reach me? And how had the message gotten through when there was supposedly no cell service in the inner canyon? I considered using the satellite phone to call him but decided it could wait. The phone was for emergencies, and a vague text about something strange didn't qualify. Besides, I was a trained ranger in familiar territory. Whatever it was, I could handle it. Still, the message lingered in my mind as I sipped my coffee and ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal with dried fruit. The sky was brightening now, the canyon walls beginning to reveal their details as the sun approached the eastern horizon. I packed my day bag methodically. Water, high-energy snacks, first aid kit, map, compass, headlamp, even though I planned to be back well before dark, and, after a moment's hesitation, the satellite phone. Better safe than sorry, especially with Martin's warning in mind. As I was about to leave, I noticed Mike emerging from his tent. He raised a hand in greeting. "Early riser too, huh?" he called softly, mindful of the still sleeping campers. I nodded. "Best time of day. Heading up to Clear Creek Trail." He raised an eyebrow. "Solo? That's pretty isolated territory." "I'm a ranger," I reminded him with a smile. "Besides, I've got this." I patted the satellite phone secured to my belt. Mike looked like he wanted to say something more but instead just nodded. "Well, enjoy the solitude. And keep an eye out for anything interesting." The way he emphasized interesting made me think of our conversation the night before. I gave him a mock salute and set off, crossing the bridge over Bright Angel Creek and joining the North Kaibab Trail. The morning was glorious, the rising sun painting the canyon walls with warm light that shifted and changed by the minute. I hiked at a steady pace, my body now accustomed to the exertion after 2 days in the canyon. The trail climbed gradually along Bright Angel Creek, passing through an area known as the Box, where the canyon narrowed dramatically with steep walls on either side. After about 2 miles, I reached the junction with the Clear Creek Trail and turned east. Almost immediately, the character of the hike changed. The maintained trail gave way to a rougher path that contoured along the side of the canyon, offering expansive views of the Colorado River far below and the South Rim in the distance. I encountered no other hikers, which wasn't surprising given the remoteness of the trail. The solitude was exactly what I'd been seeking, a chance to experience the canyon on my own terms, away from the responsibilities of my ranger duties. About an hour along the Clear Creek Trail, I stopped at a particularly scenic overlook to rest and hydrate. The vista before me was breathtaking. Layer upon layer of rock formations stretching to the horizon, each with its own color and texture, telling the story of billions of years of Earth's history. As I sat there, taking it all in, I became aware of a sound, so faint at first that I thought it might be the wind or my own breathing. But as I focused on it, it became more distinct, a rhythmic tapping or knocking, like stone striking stone. I looked around trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from farther along the trail, around a bend that obscured my view. Curious, I packed up my water bottle and continued hiking in that direction. The sound grew louder as I approached, definitely a deliberate pattern rather than random natural noises. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place, a form of communication perhaps. When I rounded the bend, I stopped short. About 50 yards ahead, a figure was crouched by the side of the trail, apparently working on something. From my position, I could see it was a man dressed in what looked like tattered clothing. His back was to me and he seemed unaware of my presence. I approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Hello there," I called when I was about 20 yards away. The figure froze, then slowly turned toward me. What I saw made me take an involuntary step backward. The man's face was gaunt and weathered beyond normal exposure to the elements, his eyes wide and unnaturally bright. His clothes weren't just tattered, they were barely clothes at all, more like rags held together by dirt and desperation. His hair and beard were wild and matted, giving him the appearance of someone who had been living rough for a very long time. But what truly unsettled me was the intensity of his gaze. A look of such primal fear and wariness that it triggered my own fight-or-flight response. This was not a typical hiker or camper. This was someone who had either chosen to disappear into the wilderness or had been lost here for an extended period. I raised my hands in a non-threatening gesture, my ranger training kicking in. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said calmly. "My name is Ryan. I'm a park ranger." I gestured to the emblem on my shirt, hoping it would reassure him. The man's eyes darted to the emblem, then back to my face. He didn't speak, but his posture relaxed slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking a careful step forward. "Do you need help?" He shook his head vehemently, then turned his attention back to what he had been doing. Now that I was closer, I could see he had been using one stone to carve marks into another, the source of the tapping sound I'd heard. I moved closer still, curiosity overcoming caution. The marks he was making were similar to the petroglyphs I'd seen the day before, elongated figures with large heads, standing in a line. "What are you drawing?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. The man glanced up at me, then back at his work. Finally, he spoke, his voice a harsh rasp from disuse. "Warning," he said simply. A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the day. "Warning about what?" He looked up again, his eyes locking with mine. "The tall ones. They come at night. They've always been here, watching, waiting." The words echoed what Mike had mentioned about the Havasupai legends of the tall one that wandered the canyon. I tried to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to dismiss what was clearly a deeply held belief for this man. "Have you seen them?" I asked carefully. He nodded, his movements jerky and agitated. "Everyone sees them eventually if they stay long enough. They don't bother you if you don't bother them. But sometimes they get curious." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes they take people." I swallowed hard, telling myself this was just the delusion of a man who had spent too much time alone in the wilderness. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of the dark shape I'd glimpsed by the river, or the strange sound I'd heard that first night. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, changing the subject. He shrugged, a gesture so normal it seemed out of place coming from him. "Seasons. Many seasons." "Do you have a name?" He paused, as if trying to remember. "Tom. I think I was Tom." My heart ached for him. Whatever his story, whatever had driven him to this life, he was clearly in need of help. Psychological help, at the very least. "Tom, let me help you," I said, reaching slowly for the satellite phone. "I can call for assistance. We can get you out of here, get you somewhere safe." His reaction was immediate and violent. He scrambled backward, clutching his carving stone to his chest like a talisman. "No! Can't leave. Not safe up there. They're everywhere now. Only safe here, where I can see them coming." I raised my hands again, backing off. Okay, no calls, I understand." Tom's breathing gradually slowed, though his eyes remained wary. After a long moment, he seemed to come to a decision. He reached into a small pouch at his waist and pulled out something that glinted in the sunlight. "Take this," he said, extending his hand toward me. "Protection." I hesitated, then carefully accepted the offering. It was a small arrowhead, expertly crafted from what appeared to be obsidian. The black volcanic glass caught the light, revealing subtle variations in its coloration. "Havasupai made," Tom explained. "Old magic. They know how to keep the tall ones away." I turned the arrowhead over in my palm, admiring the craftsmanship. Whether it had any magic or not, it was a beautiful artifact, but as a ranger, I knew I should report finding such an item. Removing artifacts from the park was illegal. Before I could decide what to do, Tom spoke again, his voice urgent. "Don't stay after dark. They're more active now. Something's changed. They're angry." "What's changed?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my skepticism. Tom's eyes darted around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "The dig, the scientists. They found something they shouldn't have. A archaeological expedition. I wasn't aware of any current digs in the canyon, but it was possible there was a permitted research project I hadn't been briefed on." "Where is this dig?" I asked, but Tom was already retreating, gathering his few possessions with remarkable speed. "Can't say more, they might hear." He tapped his ear significantly. "They're always listening. Remember the arrowhead. Don't stay after dark. With that cryptic warning, he scrambled up a nearly invisible side path and disappeared among the rocks before I could stop him. I stood there for several minutes, the obsidian arrowhead still in my hand, trying to process the bizarre encounter. Part of me, the rational, ranger part, wanted to follow him, to try again to get him the help he clearly needed. But another part, a more instinctive part that I rarely acknowledged, whispered that perhaps Tom knew things I didn't, that his warning shouldn't be dismissed so easily. I carefully tucked the arrowhead into my pocket, making a mental note to document its discovery properly when I returned to the ranger station. Then I continued along the Clear Creek Trail, my senses heightened, my mind racing with questions. The rest of my hike was uneventful, though I found myself scanning the landscape more intently than before, alert for any sign of movement or anything out of the ordinary. I reached my planned turnaround point, a spectacular viewpoint overlooking the granite narrows of the Colorado River, just after noon. As I sat eating my lunch, I pulled out my phone again and reread Martin's text message. Something strange happening near your location. Could it be related to what Tom had mentioned about a dig, or to the tall ones he seemed so afraid of? I considered using the satellite phone to call Martin after all, but decided against it. I'd be heading back to the rim tomorrow anyway, and could talk to him then. Besides, what would I say? That I'd met a possibly delusional man living rough in the canyon who was carving warning symbols about mythical beings? That hardly seemed worth an emergency call. The hike back to Bright Angel Campground was quicker than the outward journey, mostly downhill or level. The afternoon had grown hot, and I was grateful for the occasional patches of shade provided by the canyon walls. I kept an eye out for Tom on the return trip but saw no sign of him. By the time I reached the campground, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The communal area was busy with hikers preparing their evening meals and comparing notes on the day's adventures. I nodded to a few people I recognized but didn't stop to chat, heading straight for my tent. Once inside, I pulled out the obsidian arrowhead and examined it more closely. It was indeed beautifully made, the edges still sharp despite its apparent age. Was it really Havasupai in origin as Tom had claimed? And what had he meant by old magic? I wrapped the arrowhead in a bandana and tucked it securely into my backpack. Whether it had any protective powers or not, it was an interesting souvenir of a strange encounter, one that I would properly report and turn in when I returned to civilization. As I emerged from my tent to prepare dinner, I noticed Mike sitting outside his own tent, reading a book. He looked up as I approached and closed the book, marking his place with a finger. "How was Clear Creek?" he asked. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Interesting," I said finally. "Met someone out there." Mike's eyebrows rose. "Another hiker?" "Not exactly." I described Tom briefly, though I left out the more bizarre aspects of our conversation and the gift of the arrowhead. Mike frowned. "Sounds like he might be one of the canyon's hermits. There are stories about people who go off the grid and live in the backcountry. Most are harmless, just want to be left alone." "That's the impression I got," I agreed. Though he seemed troubled. "Living alone in the wilderness will do that to a person," Mike observed. "Did he say anything interesting?" Again, I hesitated. Then, deciding I had nothing to lose, I added, "He mentioned something about a dig, scientists finding something they shouldn't have. Ring any bells?" Mike's expression changed subtly, a flicker of something. Recognition? Concern? Crossing his features. "Could be the Chuar Basin project," he said after a moment. "Paleontological dig that started last month. Looking for Precambrian fossils in the Chuar group." "That's unusual, isn't it? Most digs happen on the rim, not in the canyon itself." Mike nodded. "The Chuar group is of particular interest because it contains some of the oldest evidence of complex life on Earth, microfossils dating back 1.2 billion years. But there have been rumors." "What kind of rumors?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "That they found something unexpected, something that doesn't fit with the established timeline of evolution." A chill ran down my spine, though I told myself it was just the cooling evening air. "And that's bad because," Mike shrugged, his casual gesture at odds with the intensity in his eyes. "Knowledge isn't inherently bad, Ryan, but some discoveries have consequences. They can change how we see the world, how we see ourselves. And some people, or some things, might prefer the old understanding. Before I could press him further, we were interrupted by a commotion at the nearby ranger cabin. A group of hikers had gathered, their voices raised in excitement or alarm. Mike and I exchanged glances, then both rose and headed over to see what was happening. A young woman was speaking rapidly to the on-duty ranger, her words tumbling over each other in her haste to get them out. Just disappeared. 1 minute he was right behind me on the trail and the next he was gone. I called and called, but he didn't answer. I don't know what happened. The ranger, a seasoned veteran named Dave whom I knew well, was trying to calm her. When exactly did you last see your boyfriend, ma'am? About 2 hours ago, on the South Kaibab Trail. We were heading up, just past Skeleton Point. And you've checked the immediate area? Sometimes people step off the trail for privacy, or to take photos. Of course I checked, the woman snapped, then immediately looked contrite. I'm sorry. Yes, I looked everywhere. That's why I came straight here instead of continuing up. I'm worried he might have fallen. Dave nodded, his expression serious but professional. We'll organize a search right away. The good news is there's still plenty of daylight left. I stepped forward. Dave, I'm off duty, but I can help with the search if you need an extra person. He looked up, relief crossing his features when he recognized me. Ryan, good to see you. Yes, we could use the help. Let me get the details sorted, and we'll head out in 10 minutes. As Dave turned back to the distressed woman, Mike touched my arm. Be careful out there, he said quietly. Remember what we talked about, and what your hermit friend warned you about darkness. I gave him a reassuring smile. It's probably just a misunderstanding. Her boyfriend likely took a different route by mistake. Happens all the time. Mike didn't look convinced, but he nodded and stepped back, allowing me to prepare for the search operation. Within minutes, Dave had organized a small search party consisting of himself, me, and 2 other experienced hikers who had volunteered. The missing man's girlfriend, Allison, would stay at the ranger cabin in case her boyfriend, Marcus, returned on his own. We set out immediately, heading for the South Kaibab Trail. The sun was setting as we began our ascent, casting a golden glow over the canyon that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But now, with a man potentially injured or lost, the approaching darkness felt ominous rather than picturesque. Dave had equipped us with powerful flashlights for when night fell, as well as first aid kits and water. We spread out along the trail, calling Marcus's name at regular intervals and checking any side paths or viewpoints where he might have wandered. As we climbed higher, the light faded rapidly, the canyon walls blocking the last rays of the setting sun. Soon we were hiking by flashlight, the beams cutting through the darkness like solid objects. The night was eerily quiet except for our calls and the sound of our boots on the trail. Marcus, can you hear us? Our voices echoed off the canyon walls, but no answering call came back. We continued upward, methodically searching each section of the trail. I had just reached Skeleton Point, where Allison had last seen Marcus, when I noticed something off to the side of the trail. A small object reflecting my flashlight beam. I moved closer to investigate. It was a water bottle, half hidden among the rocks. I picked it up and examined it. There was a name written on the bottom in permanent marker. Marcus. Dave, I called. I found something. The others converged on my position and I showed them the water bottle. Dave examined it, then nodded grimly. Allison confirmed he had a bottle like this, he said. Good find, Ryan. Let's expand our search from this point. We spread out, scanning the area with our flashlights. The trail here ran along a ridge with a steep drop-off to one side. If Marcus had fallen, he could be lying injured below. There, one of the volunteers shouted suddenly, I see something. We all turned to where he was pointing his flashlight. About 30 feet below the trail, caught on a rocky outcrop, was what appeared to be a backpack. Dave assessed the situation quickly. Too steep to climb down safely in the dark, I'll radio for a technical team. He unclipped the radio from his belt and stepped away to make the call. As I stood at the edge, shining my light down at the backpack, a movement caught my eye, something shifting in the darkness below the outcrop. I adjusted my beam, trying to get a better look. For just an instant, I thought I saw a tall, dark figure moving among the shadows. It seemed to look up at me, and I had the impression of large reflective eyes catching the light. Then it was gone, vanishing into the deeper darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest. Had I really seen something, or was it just a trick of the light? My imagination fueled by Tom's warnings and Mike's stories? Dave returned, his expression grim. Technical team is on their way, but it'll take them at least 2 hours to reach us. I thought I saw something moving down there, I said hesitantly. Maybe Marcus is conscious, trying to climb back up? Dave directed his own flashlight into the darkness below. I don't see anything moving now. But if he's down there, the best thing we can do is keep looking and calling his name. We continued our search along the ridge, scanning both the trail and the slopes below with our lights. But as the hours passed with no further sign of Marcus, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The canyon felt different at night. Vaster, more ancient, more alive somehow, and not entirely friendly. I found myself touching the pocket where I'd put the obsidian arrowhead, drawing an irrational comfort from its presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our flashlights, something was watching us with ancient, patient eyes. The technical rescue team arrived just after midnight, equipped with climbing gear and a basket stretcher. Their leader, a no-nonsense woman named Lisa whom I'd worked with before, quickly assessed the situation. We'll rappel down to the backpack first, she decided. If we find the victim, we'll stabilize and extract. If not, we'll expand the search area at first light. Dave nodded in agreement. Ryan, you found the water bottle. Anything else you noticed that might help? I hesitated, unsure whether to mention the dark figure I thought I'd seen. In the harsh light of the rescue team's powerful lamps, my momentary glimpse seemed less real, more likely to have been a shadow or an optical illusion. Nothing definitive, I said finally, though there seemed to be some disturbance in the soil near where the bottle was, like someone might have slipped. Lisa's team worked efficiently, setting up anchors and preparing their rappel lines. Within minutes, 2 rescuers were descending toward the outcrop where the backpack was visible. The rest of us watched from above, our flashlights trained on the operation. The night had grown cold, and I found myself shivering despite my jacket. Beside me, Dave spoke quietly into his radio, updating the ranger station on our progress. Reached the backpack, one of the rappelling rescuers called up. Confirmed it matches the description of the missing hiker's gear. Any sign of the victim? Lisa called back. There was a pause as the rescuer examined the area. Negative. No visual on the victim. But there are unusual markings on the rocks here. What kind of markings? Lisa asked, frowning. Hard to describe, almost like claw marks, but larger than any animal native to the area. And there's a substance on the rocks. Dark, viscous, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I thought of Tom's warnings about the tall ones and their nocturnal activities. Lisa and Dave exchanged concerned glances. Blood? Lisa asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Another pause. Possibly. Taking samples for analysis. Wait, there's something else. We all leaned forward, tense with anticipation. Footprints leading away from the backpack, heading deeper into the side canyon. Human footprints? Dave asked. Humanoid, came the unsettling reply. But larger than normal. Much larger. A murmur ran through the group. Even Lisa, usually unflappable, looked disconcerted. Continue the search along the footprint trail, she instructed after a moment. But maintain constant communication. If anything seems off, pull back immediately. The rescuers acknowledged the order and moved out of our line of sight, their flashlights bobbing in the darkness as they followed whatever trail they had found. What do you make of that? Dave asked me quietly, his voice pitched so the others wouldn't hear. I shook my head. I don't know. Could be another hiker who saw Marcus fall and went to help, with footprints described as much larger than normal. Dave's skepticism was evident. Before I could respond, a shout came from below, sharp, suddenly cut off. Then another voice, urgent with fear. Pull us up. Pull us up now. Lisa reacted instantly, ordering her team to retrieve the rescuers. The winch system they had set up whirred into action, the lines going taut. What's happening? Dave demanded into his radio. Report. The radio crackled with static. Then, something, movement, can't see clearly. The transmission broke up into unintelligible fragments. The first rescuer appeared over the edge, his face pale in the harsh light. The team helped him over the lip of the ridge, where he collapsed, breathing hard. Tyler? What did you see? Lisa knelt beside him. The man shook his head, his eyes wide. Not sure, something moving in the shadows. Fast, big. He swallowed hard. The footprints led to a small cave. We were about to investigate when, I don't know, something came out. All I saw was a silhouette. Tall, not human. The second rescuer was being pulled up now, equally shaken. It took Marcus's pack from the outcrop, he reported between gasps for air. Like it was collecting evidence, removing traces. A heavy silence fell over the group. I felt the weight of the obsidian arrowhead in my pocket, Tom's warnings echoing in my mind. Don't stay after dark, they're more active now. Lisa made a quick decision. We're suspending the search until daylight. Too dangerous to continue in these conditions with an unknown element in play. No one argued. Even as dedicated as we all were to finding Marcus, the unsettling reports from the rescuers had created a palpable sense of danger that overrode our normal protocols. We made our way back down to the ranger cabin at Phantom Ranch, a subdued group moving carefully by flashlight. I found myself constantly scanning the darkness around us, alert for any sign of movement or watching eyes. Allison was waiting anxiously when we arrived, jumping to her feet as we entered. Her face fell when she saw we were returning without Marcus. You didn't find him? Her voice was small, frightened. Dave stepped forward, his manner gentle but professional. We found his water bottle and backpack, but Marcus wasn't with his gear. We're suspending the search until daylight for safety reasons, but we'll resume at first light with additional resources. Allison's eyes filled with tears. So he's still out there? Alone? Possibly hurt? We don't know his status, Dave said carefully. But we're doing everything we can to locate him. She nodded numbly, sinking back onto the bench. A female ranger sat beside her, offering quiet comfort. The rest of us moved to the far side of the cabin for a debriefing. Lisa looked at each of us in turn. I want your observations, but keep it factual. What did we see out there? No one spoke immediately. Then Tyler, the first rescuer who had been pulled up, cleared his throat. The footprints were clear in the soft soil. Roughly humanoid in shape, but larger, maybe 15-16 inches long. And deeper at the front, like whatever made them was carrying significant weight or had a different weight distribution than a human. The markings on the rock were unusual too, added his partner, a man named Chris. 5 parallel lines like fingers or claws, but spanning about 12 inches, wider than a bear's paw and with a different pattern. Lisa turned to me. Ryan, you thought you saw movement before we arrived. Can you describe it? All eyes turned to me. I chose my words carefully. It was brief, just a glimpse of a dark figure moving below the outcrop. Tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. But it was dark and I was using just a flashlight. Could have been shadows playing tricks. Dave nodded. We have to consider all possibilities. Marcus could have fallen, then regained consciousness and moved from the initial impact site. The unusual signs might have natural explanations we're not seeing clearly in the dark. No one looked convinced, least of all Dave himself. But it was the rational explanation, the one that fit our training and experience. Get some rest, Lisa told the group. We resume at first light. As the meeting broke up, I noticed Mike standing in the doorway of the cabin. He must have heard about the search and come to see what was happening. Our eyes met, and he gestured subtly for me to join him outside. The night air was cool and still as we stepped away from the cabin. The stars blazed overhead, more brilliant than they ever appeared in civilized areas with light pollution. You didn't find him, Mike stated rather than asked. I shook my head. Found his gear, but no sign of Marcus himself. Just some strange evidence. What kind of evidence? I hesitated, then decided I had nothing to lose by being honest. Unusual footprints, markings on rocks that looked like claw marks. And I thought I saw something moving in the darkness, something tall. Mike was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable in the dim light spilling from the cabin windows. Finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. The Havasupai have a name for what you saw. Hakwaidi, the ones who watch from shadows. Most outsiders dismiss their stories as myth or misidentified bears, but the legends are consistent across multiple tribes who inhabited the canyon. You're saying these things are real? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Mike shrugged. I'm saying that indigenous peoples lived in harmony with this landscape for thousands of years. They observed, they recorded, they warned. We might be wise to listen. And these Hagwaidi, what do the legends say about them? That they're ancient, predating human arrival in the canyon, that they avoid contact but watch us constantly, that they're territorial and protective of certain sacred sites. He paused. And that occasionally they take people. A chill ran through me. Take them where? The stories vary. Some say to their dwelling places deep within the canyon walls. Others say to another world entirely, a shadow realm that exists alongside our own. Mike's voice had taken on the quality of a storyteller, resonant and measured. The Havasupai believe there are thin places in the canyon where the barriers between worlds can be crossed. I thought of the strange petroglyphs I'd seen, and of Tom carving similar images as a warning. And you believe all this? Mike smiled faintly. What I believe isn't important, but I do know that dismissing indigenous knowledge has been a mistake repeated throughout history. The Havasupai lived here for centuries without the kind of disappearances we see among modern visitors. They knew how to coexist. How? I asked, genuinely curious despite my lingering skepticism. They respected boundaries, avoided certain areas, especially at night, left offerings at specific sites, and they carried protective talismans. Mike glanced at me. Like that arrowhead your hermit friend gave you? I stared at him, startled. How did you know about that? I've spent a lot of time studying the canyon and its mysteries, Ryan. I recognize the signs. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Before I could answer, Dave emerged from the cabin, looking tired but determined. Ryan, we're setting up a rotation for monitoring the radio tonight, in case Marcus makes contact. Can you take the 2-4 a.m. shift? Of course, I agreed immediately. Dave nodded his thanks and went back inside. Mike and I stood in silence for a moment longer. Be careful, he said finally, and keep that arrowhead close. With that cryptic advice, he turned and walked back to his tent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the vast star-filled sky above. My shift at the radio passed uneventfully. I sat in the quiet cabin, listening to the occasional static and watching the minutes tick by on my watch. Allison had finally been convinced to get some rest in one of the spare bunks, though I doubted she was sleeping much. As I sat there, I pulled out the obsidian arrowhead and turned it over in my hands, examining its perfect edges and smooth, glassy surface. Was it really a protective talisman, as Mike had suggested, or just a beautiful artifact created by skilled hands long ago? I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. The rational part of me still insisted there must be a logical explanation for Marcus's disappearance and the strange signs we'd found. But another part, a deeper, more instinctive part, whispered that there were indeed mysteries in this ancient landscape that defied modern understanding. When my shift ended, I returned to my tent, though I doubted I would sleep. I lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the canyon, the distant rush of the river, the occasional call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, and somewhere beneath those familiar sounds, I thought I detected something else. A low, rhythmic humming or chanting, almost below the threshold of hearing. It reminded me of the tapping sound I'd heard before finding Tom, but more melodic, more purposeful. I must have dozed off eventually, because I was awakened by the first light of dawn filtering through my tent. I emerged to find the search operation already gearing up, with additional rangers having arrived from the rim during the night. Lisa was organizing teams, assigning search areas based on our findings from the previous night. I joined Dave's group, which would return to the site where we'd found Marcus's belongings and follow the trail of unusual footprints. The canyon looked different in the morning light, less mysterious, more defined. The shadows that had seemed so threatening at night were now just the natural contours of the landscape, yet the sense of unease remained. a persistent feeling that we were being watched as we made our way up the South Kaibab Trail. When we reached the site, the technical team rappelled down once more, this time with Dave and me accompanying them. In daylight, the outcrop where the backpack had been found was clearly visible, a flat ledge about 30 feet below the trail. The markings that had been described the night before were still there. 5 parallel grooves in the rock face too regular to be natural erosion. And the footprints were even more unsettling in daylight. They were indeed larger than any human foot I'd ever seen, with a strange configuration that didn't quite match any known wildlife. We followed the trail leading away from the outcrop, moving cautiously through the rough terrain. It led to a narrow side canyon, then to a small cave opening partially hidden by boulders. Dave called for a halt. "Tyler, Chris, you said this is where you saw something emerge last night." The 2 rescuers nodded, their expressions tense. "We approach with caution," Dave decided. "Ryan and I will take point. The rest of you maintain position here and be ready to assist." I unclipped my flashlight as Dave and I moved forward. The cave entrance was about 5 feet high, requiring us to stoop slightly as we entered. The beam of my light revealed a narrow passage that quickly turned, preventing us from seeing far inside. "Hello?" Dave called. "Marcus, are you in there?" His voice echoed back to us, but there was no response. We proceeded carefully, moving deeper into the passage. The air grew cooler, with a strange musty odor I couldn't quite identify. The floor showed signs of frequent use, smooth and worn, with more of those unusual footprints visible in patches of soft soil. After about 20 yards, the passage widened into a small chamber. Our flashlight beams revealed something unexpected. The walls were covered with paintings and carvings, similar to the petroglyphs I'd seen earlier but more elaborate, more detailed. They depicted tall, elongated figures interacting with smaller, clearly human shapes. Some scenes showed what appeared to be ceremonies or exchanges. Others were more disturbing, with the tall figures carrying or dragging humans away. "What the hell?" Dave murmured, moving his light across the images. "These aren't documented in any archaeological survey I know of." I stepped closer to one particular image that caught my eye. It showed a tall figure holding what appeared to be an obsidian arrowhead with rays or energy emanating from it. Below were smaller figures apparently protected by this power. As I examined the carving, my hand unconsciously moved to my pocket where Tom's arrowhead rested. Was there a connection? "Ryan, look at this." Dave's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He was pointing to a dark alcove at the back of the chamber. As I directed my light there, I saw a pile of objects, modern objects, a water bottle, a hiking boot, a camera, a watch, and on top of the pile, clearly visible, was Marcus's backpack. "It's like a collection," Dave said, his voice hushed. "Or trophies." Before I could respond, a sound came from deeper in the cave, a shuffling, scraping noise, like something large moving across stone. We both froze, flashlights directed toward the source of the sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from a previously unnoticed tunnel at the far side of the chamber, a figure began to emerge. It was tall, far taller than any human, its head nearly touching the 7-foot ceiling. Its limbs were long and oddly jointed, its skin a dark, mottled gray that seemed to absorb rather than reflect our flashlight beams. But its most striking feature was its face, a broad, flat expanse with large, reflective eyes that caught our lights and threw them back at us with a reddish glow. Time seemed to stop as we stood there, human and non-human, regarding each other across the ancient chamber. I felt Dave tense beside me, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Without thinking, I reached out and stopped him, my instincts screaming that showing aggression would be a fatal mistake. Instead, slowly and deliberately, I withdrew the obsidian arrowhead from my pocket and held it up, the black stone catching what little light there was in the chamber. The entity's attention shifted to the arrowhead. It made a sound, a low, vibrating hum that I felt more than heard. Then, with a movement too quick for my eyes to follow, it retreated back into the tunnel and was gone. Dave and I stood frozen for several heartbeats, the silence broken only by our rapid breathing. What the hell was that?" Dave finally managed, his voice shaking. I shook my head, unable to find words. The rational explanations I'd clung to had just crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. We had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that defied our understanding of the natural world. We need to get out of here, I said, finding my voice at last. Now, Dave nodded, and we backed carefully toward the entrance, never turning our backs on the tunnel where the entity had disappeared. Only when we emerged into the sunlight did I feel like I could breathe properly again. The rest of the team looked at us expectantly, clearly noting our shaken expressions. What did you find? Lisa asked. Dave and I exchanged glances. How could we possibly explain what we'd just witnessed? Signs that Marcus was there, Dave said finally. His backpack. And evidence of other missing persons. But no Marcus himself? Lisa pressed. Dave shook his head. The cave system may extend further than we could safely explore without proper equipment. We'll need a specialized team. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. And it was easier than trying to describe an entity that would sound like something from a horror movie or a campfire tale. As the team discussed next steps, I found myself scanning the canyon walls around us, wondering how many other caves and passages honeycombed the ancient rock, and what else might be dwelling in those hidden places, watching and waiting as it had for countless generations. The search for Marcus continued throughout the day, with multiple teams exploring different areas of the canyon. But I knew, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that we wouldn't find him, at least not in any place accessible to us. He had been taken, just as Tom had warned, just as the ancient petroglyphs depicted. By evening, the official search was being scaled back, transitioning from rescue to recovery mode. Allison was devastated, clinging to hope even as the professionals around her gently prepared her for the worst. I found her sitting alone outside the ranger cabin as the day's light faded, staring out at the canyon with red-rimmed eyes. Mind if I join you? I asked gently. She shrugged, which I took as permission to sit on the bench beside her. They're giving up, aren't they? She said, her voice flat with exhaustion and grief. They're not giving up, I assured her. But they are. Adjusting expectations. Allison turned to look at me, her gaze intense. You were in that cave. Dave wouldn't tell me what you found, just that there was evidence. What did you see, Ryan? What really happened to Marcus? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. Would the truth, or what I believed to be the truth, help or hurt her? I think, I said slowly, that there are aspects of this canyon that we don't fully understand. Forces or entities that have been here far longer than us. Her eyes widened slightly. What are you saying? The indigenous peoples who lived here had extensive knowledge of these forces. They had protocols for coexisting with them, rules about where not to go, especially after dark. You think Marcus was taken by something? Some kind of creature? Her voice held disbelief, but not dismissal. I nodded slowly. I think that's possible, yes. Is he dead? The question was direct, desperate. Again, I considered my words carefully. The legends don't always end in death. Sometimes those who are taken are somewhere else, another place that exists alongside our own. Allison was silent for a long moment, processing this. That sounds crazy, she said finally. But no crazier than Marcus simply vanishing into thin air. She looked at me searchingly. Do you think there's any chance of getting him back? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't considered that possibility. I don't know, I admitted. The stories don't speak much about returns, she nodded, a new determination entering her expression. Then I need to learn more about these stories. If there's any chance at all. I recognized the dangerous hope kindling in her eyes. Allison, even if the legends are true, they suggest these entities are ancient and powerful, not something to be challenged lightly. What choice do I have? She asked simply. Either I accept that Marcus is gone forever, or I try to find a way to reach him. Wouldn't you do the same for someone you loved? I had no answer for that, because the truth was, I didn't know what I would do in her position. The entity we had encountered in the cave had been otherworldly, terrifying in its alienness, yet it had also shown intelligence, recognition, and it had responded to the arrowhead. "I can put you in touch with someone," I said finally. "A professor who knows a lot about the indigenous legends of the canyon. He might be able to help you understand what you're dealing with." "Mike?" she asked, surprising me. "The older man with the white beard? He already offered to introduce me to some Havasupai contacts." I nodded, not entirely surprised that Mike had already approached her. He seemed to have appointed himself a guardian of the canyon's mysteries, a bridge between the modern world and the ancient knowledge. "Listen to him," I advised. "And be careful. Whatever you decide to do." Allison reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for being honest with me. Everyone else just gives me platitudes or false hope." As I walked back to my tent for my final night in the canyon, I reflected on the strange turn my solo backpacking trip had taken. I had come seeking solitude and a deeper connection with the landscape I worked in. Instead, I had encountered mysteries and entities that challenged my understanding of reality itself. Tomorrow, I would hike back up to the rim, return to my ranger duties, and try to make sense of everything I had experienced. I would need to decide what to report officially and what to keep to myself, and I would need to reconcile the rational, scientific worldview of my training with the undeniable evidence of my own eyes. As darkness fell over the canyon, I lay in my tent, the obsidian arrowhead clutched in my hand like a talisman, and I wondered what other ancient secrets lay hidden in the shadows of this vast and timeless landscape, waiting to be discovered, or perhaps waiting to discover us. Dawn on my final day in the canyon painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the light gradually illuminating the towering walls and deep recesses. I emerged from my tent after a fitful night's sleep, dreams of elongated figures and glowing eyes having disturbed my rest. The campground was already stirring, hikers preparing for their day's journeys. The search for Marcus continued, but with diminished resources and expectations. The official theory had settled on a fall into an inaccessible area of the canyon, with recovery now considered unlikely. Only a handful of us knew the truth, or at least a truth so strange and unsettling that it defied easy categorization. I packed my gear methodically, my mind elsewhere. The obsidian arrowhead, which I now carried in my breast pocket rather than buried in my pack, seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth against my chest. Was it merely absorbing my body heat, or was there something more to Tom's claim of old magic? As I was collapsing my tent, Mike approached, his own pack already secured on his shoulders. "Heading up to day 2? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded. "Bright Angel Trail. You?" "Same. Thought I'd take the longer, less steep route after everything that's happened." Mike studied me for a moment. "You've seen them now," he said. It wasn't a question. I paused in my packing, then nodded once. "In the cave, one of them at least. And it was not anything I can explain. Not anything science as I understand it can explain." I looked up at him. "You knew, didn't you? You've seen them too." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "Many years ago, on a solo research trip, I was mapping some of the less accessible geological formations when I encountered one. Like you, I had been given a protective item, in my case a small pouch of herbs and minerals prepared by a Havasupai elder." "Why didn't you tell me directly?" I asked, a hint of accusation in my tone. Mike shrugged. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have written me off as an eccentric old professor with an overactive imagination? Some things have to be experienced to be believed, Ryan." He had a point. Even now, having seen the entity with my own eyes, part of me was trying to rationalize the experience. A hallucination brought on by stress and poor air circulation in the cave, perhaps, or an elaborate hoax. "What are they?" I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me since our encounter. "The Havasupai say they were the first inhabitants of the canyon, present long before humans arrived. Not quite flesh as we understand it, not quite spirit. Guardians or wardens of certain sacred places." Mike's voice took on the quality of a storyteller again. "They've been called many things by different tribes. Hakwaiti, the tall ones, the watchers in shadows. European settlers occasionally glimpsed them too, leading to stories of canyon devils or red-eyed giants. And they take people?" Mike nodded solemnly. Those who violate certain boundaries, whether out of ignorance or disrespect, those who intrude upon sacred sites or remove artifacts, and occasionally, it seems, those who simply have the misfortune to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like Marcus, I said quietly. Perhaps, or perhaps there's more to his story than we know. I finished packing in silence, mulling over Mike's words. Finally, I asked, "What about the dig Tom mentioned? The scientists finding something they shouldn't have?" Yes, the Chore Basin Project." Mike's expression grew troubled. "I made some inquiries after our conversation. The official line is that they're studying Precambrian microfossils, which is true as far as it goes, but rumors have circulated in the archaeological community about more unusual findings." "What kind of findings?" Mike lowered his voice, though there was no one within earshot. "Artifacts embedded in rock strata dated to over 1 billion years old. Long before humans, before any complex life should have existed on Earth, and cave systems with markings similar to what you described seeing, but far older than any known human habitation of this continent." The implications were staggering. Either our understanding of human history was fundamentally flawed, or something non-human had been creating artifacts and artwork in these canyons eons before our species evolved. "The dig may have disturbed something," Mike continued, "crossed a boundary that had been respected for generations. The Havasupai warned against excavation in that area, but their concerns were dismissed as superstition, and now the Tall Ones are, what, retaliating?" Mike shook his head. "I don't think it's that simple. These entities don't think like us, don't experience time like us. They're responding to a disturbance in patterns and relationships that have existed for millennia. To them, our actions might appear as aggression or invasion." I shouldered my now packed backpack, ready for the long climb out of the canyon. "So what happens now?" "That depends partly on you, Ryan." Mike's gaze was steady, evaluating. "You're a ranger, you have an official voice, a platform. What will you say about what you've seen?" It was a question I'd been asking myself all night. My report would become part of the official record. My words would shape how Marcus's disappearance was understood and investigated. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "The truth sounds impossible. I'd be laughed out of the service, maybe even sent for psychological evaluation. Yet concealing the truth might lead to more disappearances, more encounters." Mike's tone wasn't judgmental, merely stating facts. We began walking toward the trailhead, joining the stream of hikers beginning their ascent. The morning was cool, perfect for the strenuous climb ahead. "Maybe there's a middle ground," I suggested after we'd been hiking for a while. "A way to incorporate elements of the truth without sounding like I've lost my mind." Mike nodded encouragingly. "Such as?" I could emphasize the importance of respecting indigenous knowledge about the canyon. "Push for certain areas to be designated as culturally sensitive and restricted from general access. Advocate for better education about not removing artifacts or disturbing sites." "All reasonable measures that might help prevent future incidents," Mike agreed. "Though they don't address the immediate situation with the Chore Basin dig." We fell silent as we navigated a steep section of trail, the exertion requiring our full attention. Around us, the canyon was coming fully alive with daylight, revealing its intricate textures and colors. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and now, to me, filled with new mysteries and hidden dimensions I had never suspected. As we paused at the 3-mile rest house for water and rest, I noticed Allison among a group of hikers heading down into the canyon. She saw me at the same moment and detached from her group to approach us. "You're leaving?" she asked, noting our upward trajectory. I nodded. "My permit ends today. I have to get back to work." She looked disappointed but resolute. "I'm staying. Mike has arranged for me to meet with a Havasupai elder who knows the old stories, and I've applied for an extended permit." "Allison," I began, concerned. "I'm not sure that's—" "My decision is made," she interrupted firmly. "I can't leave, not while there's any chance of finding Marcus." I glanced at Mike, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug. He had obviously decided to help her rather than dissuade her. "Just be careful," I said finally. "Respect the boundaries. Don't go exploring caves alone. And especially, don't stay out after dark," she finished for me. "I know." Mike has briefed me on the protocols. I reached into my pocket and withdrew the obsidian arrowhead, holding it out to her. Take this, it helped me in the cave. It might help you too. Allison accepted the artifact with solemn reverence, seeming to understand its significance without explanation. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll remember everything you told me. We parted ways, Allison continuing down while Mike and I resumed our climb. I watched her diminishing figure with a mixture of admiration and concern. Her determination was impressive, but I feared where it might lead her. Will she find anything? I asked Mike once she was out of earshot. He considered the question carefully. The Havasupai have rituals for communicating with the Tall Ones, for requesting the return of those taken. Whether these rituals are effective, he trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. You're helping her, though. I'm giving her access to knowledge, to people who understand these matters better than I do. What she does with that information is her choice. Mike adjusted his hat against the strengthening sun. Hope is a powerful force, Ryan. Sometimes it's all we have. We continued our ascent, the conversation turning to lighter topics as the day wore on and the climb grew more demanding. The Bright Angel Trail zigzagged its way up the canyon wall, each switchback offering a new perspective on the vast landscape below. By early afternoon, we had reached Indian Garden, the halfway point of our journey. The oasis of cottonwood trees provided welcome shade, and we stopped for lunch and an extended rest. As we sat eating our trail mix and dried fruit, a park volunteer approached. The same older man, Bill, whom I'd spoken with on my way down. Thought that was you, Ranger, he said, dropping onto the bench beside us. How was your trip? I exchanged a quick glance with Mike before answering carefully. Educational. Saw some interesting things. Bill's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. Bet you did. Canyon's full of surprises if you know where to look. He nodded toward Mike. Professor, good to see you again. You two know each other, I asked, surprised. Old friends, Mike confirmed. Bill here was my guide on my first research trip to the canyon, 30 years ago now. Bill chuckled. Back when I still had color in my hair and spring in my step. He turned more serious. Heard about that missing hiker? Young fellow, Canadian? I nodded. Marcus. We found his gear but no sign of him. Where'd you find the gear exactly? Bill asked, his casual tone not quite masking his interest. On an outcrop below Skeleton Point and some in a cave nearby, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Bill and Mike exchanged a significant look. That area, Bill said slowly, has always been sensitive. The Havasupai marked it with warning signs that most white folks don't recognize, rock cairns in specific patterns, petroglyphs that tell you to keep moving, not linger. I've seen similar markings, I said, thinking of the petroglyphs I'd discovered and the ones in the cave. Elongated figures with large heads. Bill nodded. Those are the guardians, the watchers, the warnings. You believe in them too, I said. It wasn't a question. Spent 50 years in this canyon, son. Seen things that don't fit in any ranger training manual or geology textbook. Bill's gaze drifted out over the vast expanse beyond Indian Garden. This place has layers that go deeper than rock, histories older than human memory. We sat in contemplative silence for a moment. Three men united by uncommon experiences, yet divided by how we integrated those experiences into our worldviews. What would you do if you were me? I asked finally. About the report, about what I saw, Bill considered the question, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. In my day, we had an unspoken policy. Document the facts, the missing person, the found belongings, the search parameters. Note any unusual markings or tracks as unidentified, but leave out the more extraordinary elements. And that helped? I asked skeptically. It kept our jobs, Bill replied with a wry smile. But we also kept our own records. I've been working as a park ranger for 15 years, but I've never seen footprints that disappear mid-stride. The Olympic National Forest had been my home longer than anywhere else. 15 years patrolling these misty trails, documenting wildlife patterns, guiding lost hikers back to civilization and occasionally rescuing the unprepared from nature's indifference. I thought I knew every inch of this place, every sound the forest could make, every track an animal could leave, but nothing in my training prepared me for what I found that morning in early October. The rain had been steady for 3 days before finally letting up, leaving the forest floor soft and receptive. Perfect tracking conditions. I was checking the remote northeastern section of my territory, an area locals called Shadow Valley, a name I'd always found melodramatic until that day. My radio crackled with static. "James, you copy? Over." It was Elijah, one of the newer rangers stationed at the visitor center. "I copy." "What's up?" I responded, grateful for the human connection in the otherwise silent woods. "Just checking in. You've been out there a while. Everything okay?" I paused, looking at the strange indentation in the mud before me. "Yeah, just found something interesting. I'll report back when I'm at the station." "Copy that. Be careful out there, be careful." Standard ranger sign-off, but it sent an unexpected chill down my spine. The footprint I was examining was massive, easily 18 inches long with 5 distinct toes. The depth suggested something weighing at least 700 pounds. But what disturbed me most was that it wasn't alone. There was a clear trail of these prints, evenly spaced about 6 feet apart, suggesting an enormous bipedal creature with a purposeful stride. I followed the tracks, taking photos with my department-issued camera. The forest seemed to grow quieter with each step, the usual background chorus of birds and insects fading to nothing. The silence was oppressive, pressing against my eardrums like I'd descended too quickly in elevation. Then the tracks simply stopped, not gradually, like something moving from soft earth to rocky ground, not veering off into the underbrush. The trail of massive footprints ended mid-stride, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air, or been plucked up from above. I crouched down, studying the last print. The impression was perfect, undisturbed. There was no sign of a pivot, no indication the creature had jumped or changed direction. It had taken a step and then nothing. "What the hell?" I muttered, the sound of my voice unnaturally loud in the silence. Something rustled in the underbrush about 50 yards to my right. I straightened quickly, hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on my belt. But the forest had gone still again. My 15 years of experience told me to document everything and leave. But something else, curiosity, stubbornness, or perhaps something more primal, pulled me toward the source of the sound. The undergrowth was thick here, sword ferns and salal bushes creating a natural barrier. I pushed through carefully, trying to minimize the noise. The vegetation suddenly gave way to a small clearing, and I stopped cold. In the center of the clearing stood a crude structure, a pyramid of broken tree limbs and branches that had to be at least 9 feet tall. The branches weren't broken by storm damage. They had been snapped with tremendous force and deliberately arranged. Around the structure, the ground had been cleared of all vegetation in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. And there was the smell, an overpowering musky odor that reminded me of wet animal fur mixed with something acrid and unfamiliar. My mouth went dry. In all my years in these woods, I'd never encountered anything like this. It wasn't the work of bears or other known wildlife. It wasn't typical human camping behavior either. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small and vulnerable. The only response was a deep rhythmic knocking from somewhere deeper in the forest, like someone striking a hollow tree with tremendous force. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. I waited, heart pounding. But there was nothing more. With shaking hands, I photographed the structure from multiple angles, then backed away carefully the way I'd come. All my instincts screamed to run, but training kept me moving deliberately, scanning my surroundings with each step. By the time I reached the trail again, the footprints I'd been following had disappeared, not just ended, but gone, as if the impressions had been meticulously filled in and smoothed over while I was in the clearing. I stood there, staring at the now unmarked ground, a cold sweat breaking out across my back despite the autumn chill. That's when I noticed it. A symbol carved freshly into the trunk of a massive Douglas fir. It was simple but deliberate, a vertical line with 3 horizontal lines crossing it at different heights. Below it was another carving, much older and weathered, similar in design but with subtle differences. The older carving had to have been there for decades, the tree having grown around it, distorting its original shape. I took a photo of both carvings, my ranger training battling with a growing sense of unease. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything I'd seen, the tracks, the structure, the carvings, as elaborate hoaxes. People did strange things in national forests, and Bigfoot pranks weren't uncommon. But another part of me, a deeper, more instinctual part, knew that what I was experiencing wasn't human mischief. 3 more knocks echoed through the trees. Closer this time. I hurried back toward my truck, trying to maintain my composure while moving as quickly as possible through the dense forest. The usual 3-hour hike back to the ranger station took me just under 2 hours, though I couldn't remember most of the journey. When I reached the station, I found William, the head ranger, drinking coffee and reviewing trail maintenance schedules. "James, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting down his mug. I dropped into a chair across from him. "Not a ghost. Something else." I explained what I'd found. The footprints, the structure, the carvings, the knocking sounds. As I spoke, William's expression shifted from mild concern to something more guarded. "Let me see those photos," he said when I'd finished. I handed over my camera, watching his face as he flipped through the images. His expression revealed nothing, but the slight tightening around his eyes told me enough. "You've seen something like this before," I said. It wasn't a question. William sighed, setting the camera down. "Not me personally, but there have been reports. Similar structures, similar tracks, always in the most remote parts of the forest. Why haven't I heard about this? 15 years, Will. 15 years I've been working these woods. Because it's not something we discuss officially." He leaned forward, lowering his voice though we were alone in the station. "The department doesn't want to encourage Bigfoot hunters or paranormal enthusiasts swarming the forest. It's a conservation nightmare, not to mention a safety risk." "So you think it's Bigfoot?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice despite what I'd seen. "I think there are things in these forests that we don't understand," William replied carefully. "Things the local tribes have known about for generations. They call it Seatco or Stettel, the one who runs and hides." I remembered the strange carvings. "The symbol I found, is it tribal?" William nodded slowly. "Could be. The Quinaul have stories about forest guardians who leave marks to warn humans away from sacred places." "Warn them away from what?" "That," William said, standing up and retrieving a topographical map from a drawer, "is what I think you should find out." He spread the map on the desk, pointing to a remote area about 20 miles from where I'd found the tracks. "There's an old Quinaul man named Benjamin who lives out here. If anyone knows what you encountered today, it's him. You want me to talk to him?" "I think you need to. And James," William's voice turned grave, "what you saw today, the tracks that vanish, the structure, don't mention that to anyone else. The official report will show you conducted routine patrol with nothing unusual to note." "You want me to lie in an official report?" I asked, surprised. "I want you to be careful about what becomes part of the permanent record," William replied. "Trust me on this. Some things are better kept quiet until we understand them better." As I drove home that evening to my cabin on the edge of the forest, the setting sun cast long shadows through the trees. The forest I'd known and loved for 15 years suddenly seemed different, older, more watchful, harboring secrets I was only beginning to glimpse. That night, I dreamed of massive footprints in mud and wooden structures reaching toward the sky. And in the distance, 3 distinct knocks echoing through ancient trees, calling me deeper into the mystery. The next morning dawned gray and misty, typical October weather for the Olympic Peninsula. I'd slept poorly, my dreams filled with shadowy figures moving just at the edge of vision. Every time I'd approach them, they'd vanish into the mist, leaving only those strange, deliberate knocking sounds behind. I called the station early, telling Elijah I was taking a personal day. It wasn't entirely a lie. What I planned to do was personal, just not in the way he might assume. William had texted me detailed directions to Benjamin's place, along with a cryptic message. "Ask about the vanishing ones. He'll know what you mean. The drive took me deeper into the peninsula than I usually ventured, past the small logging town of Forks and onto increasingly narrow roads that wound through towering stands of ancient cedar and hemlock. The last 5 miles weren't even on my GPS, forcing me to rely on William's hand-drawn map. Benjamin's home was a small cabin nestled against the base of a ridge surrounded by a garden that seemed wild and untamed at first glance but revealed careful cultivation upon closer inspection. Medicinal herbs, I realized, recognizing some from my wilderness training. As I stepped out of my truck, the cabin door opened before I could knock. The man who emerged was shorter than I expected but carried himself with unmistakable dignity. His weathered face suggested he was in his 70s, though his movements were those of a much younger man. Long silver hair was pulled back in a traditional braid, and his dark eyes studied me with unsettling intensity. "You're the ranger," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. James Carter. William sent me." "William?" Benjamin nodded. "He has respect for the old ways. Come inside, Ranger. The forest has ears." The interior of the cabin was warm and surprisingly bright, with large windows facing east to catch the morning light. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a complex aroma. One wall was lined with books, an unexpected library in such a remote location. "Sit." Benjamin gestured to a simple wooden chair near a small table. "Tell me what you saw." I described everything: the footprints that vanished mid-stride, the wooden structure, the carvings, the knocking sounds. As I spoke, Benjamin's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his fingers tapping rhythmically on his knee. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, the same pattern as the knocks I'd heard. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You have seen what few white men ever see," he finally said. "The Shiatko has revealed itself to you." "Shiatko?" I repeated, struggling with the pronunciation. "The tall ones who walk between worlds. Your people call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but these names miss their true nature." Benjamin rose and moved to a carved chest in the corner of the room. From it, he withdrew a small leather pouch and a rolled piece of hide covered with faded pictographs. "My grandfather's grandfather drew these," he said, carefully unrolling the hide on the table. "He was a medicine man who communicated with the Shiatko. They have been here since before our people, guardians of the deepest forests." The drawings showed tall, broad-shouldered figures with distinctive crests on their heads. In some images, they appeared to be stepping into trees or rock faces, half their bodies disappearing. "They can move between this world and the spirit world," Benjamin explained. "That is why their tracks disappear. They step from one reality to another." I struggled to reconcile his explanation with my scientific training. "With all respect, sir, that's difficult to believe." Benjamin's gaze was piercing. "You saw the tracks vanish. Did you have a better explanation?" "I didn't. The structure you found is a gateway," he continued. "A place where the veil between worlds grows thin. The Sayatko build these markers at crossing points." "Crossing points for what?" "For them, for other spirits. Sometimes," he paused, studying me, "for humans they choose to take." A chill ran through me. "Take? You mean they abduct people?" "Not as you think of abduction. They are guardians, protectors of sacred places. When humans violate those places, the Shiatko sometimes take them to teach respect. Some return, some do not." I thought of the missing persons reports that occasionally crossed my desk. Hikers who vanished without trace, experienced outdoorsmen who seemed to simply walk off the face of the earth. These cases were rare but disturbing in their completeness. No bodies, no equipment, no sign of struggle or accident. "The symbol I found carved in the tree. What does it mean?" Benjamin reached for the leather pouch he'd brought out earlier. From it, he withdrew a small wooden talisman with the same symbol carved into it. "It is a warning and a doorway. The vertical line represents the boundary between worlds. The 3 crossing lines are the paths one might take." He placed the talisman in my palm. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, as if the wood itself carried unseen weight. "Keep this with you. It marks you as one who knows of the Shiatko. They may watch you, but they will not take you unless you give them reason." "What reasons would I give them?" I asked, closing my fingers around the talisman. "Disrespect." Violation of sacred spaces. Hunting them. Benjamin's expression darkened. There are men who come to these forests seeking the Sikiatko, wanting to prove their existence, to capture or kill them for fame or money. These men often disappear. I thought of the Bigfoot hunters who occasionally sought permits for expeditions in the national forest. Most were harmless enthusiasts, but some came equipped with traps, tranquilizer guns, even live ammunition, as if preparing for big game hunting rather than scientific documentation. There's a research group that's been requesting extended permits in that area, I said. The Olympic Project, they call themselves. Professional Bigfoot hunters with scientific pretensions. Benjamin nodded grimly. I know of them. They place cameras where they should not. They invade ceremonial grounds without understanding. The Siatko are aware of them. Are they in danger? We are all in danger when the old balances are disrupted. Benjamin stood, signaling our conversation was nearing its end. The Fiatko have shown themselves to you for a reason, Ranger. They do not reveal their signs by accident. What do they want from me? That, he said, you must discover yourself. But I will tell you this. There is a place, about 3 miles northwest of where you found the structure. My people call it the Whispering Circle. It is a ring of 7 cedars that grew in a perfect circle, a natural phenomenon, but sacred to both my people and the Siatko. The Olympic Project has placed cameras there, hunting blinds, traps. I felt a surge of anger. Those would require permits that had not crossed my desk. That's illegal activity in protected forest. It is more than illegal. It is dangerous. Benjamin moved to the door, opening it. The Siatko have been patient, but their patience ends. If these researchers continue, they will face consequences beyond your laws. As I stepped back outside, the forest seemed darker despite the fact that it was only early afternoon. The mist had thickened, clinging to the massive trees surrounding Benjamin's cabin. One last thing, Ranger, Benjamin said as I turned to leave. The knocking you heard, it is how they communicate over distance. 3 knocks is a warning. If you hear 4 knocks, run. Do not look back, do not stop. 4 knocks means a crossing is beginning, and those caught between worlds may never find their way home. I drove back toward the ranger station in silence, the wooden talisman heavy in my pocket. Part of me wanted to dismiss Benjamin's stories as the superstitions of an old man steeped in cultural mythology, but the image of those footprints simply ending, as if their maker had stepped out of our reality, kept returning to me. At the station, I accessed the permit database, searching for any documentation of the Olympic Project's activities. There were approved permits for day hikes and camera placement along established trails, but nothing for the remote area Benjamin had called the Whispering Circle. William found me still at the computer an hour later. Benjamin talked to you, he said, noting my expression. Yes, he told me some difficult things to believe. William sat on the edge of the desk. 25 years ago, before I was head ranger, I found a campsite in the deep forest. Research equipment scattered everywhere, half-eaten food, sleeping bags still laid out. 4 experienced biologists from the university documenting owl populations. They were just gone. No bodies ever found. He leaned closer. The strangest part? There was a perfect circle cleared around their camp, with one of those pyramid structures at the center. Just like what you described seeing yesterday. I felt the weight of the talisman in my pocket. William, the Olympic Project is operating outside their permitted areas. Benjamin says they've set up cameras and traps in a place called the Whispering Circle. William's face hardened. That's restricted land, sacred to the Quinaw. I need to go out there, document the violations, remove any unauthorized equipment. Not alone, you don't. William's tone left no room for argument. I'm coming with you. First thing tomorrow. That night, as I prepared my gear for the next day's expedition, I found myself repeatedly checking the doors and windows of my cabin. The forest outside seemed alive with sounds, the rustle of branches, the soft padding of unseen feet in the underbrush. Just before midnight, I heard it. 3 distinct knocks, somewhere in the darkness beyond my property line. I froze, listening intently, my hand instinctively finding the wooden talisman Benjamin had given me. 3 knocks. A warning, he'd said. But a warning about what? Dawn came with a heavy fog that clung to the forest floor, turning the world ghostly white. I met William at the ranger station at 5:30 a.m., both of us dressed in full gear with extra provisions. The forecast predicted rain by afternoon, typical for October in the Olympics, but it would make our work more difficult. I called Lucas at the permit office, William said as we loaded our packs into his more rugged Forest Service vehicle. Confirmed what you found yesterday. The Olympic project has no authorization for the Whispering Circle area. Not now. Not ever. So they're knowingly trespassing on protected land, I said. Worse than that. They filed false documentation about their camera placements. William's expression was grim. Lucas says their last permit application included GPS coordinates that conveniently avoided mentioning they'd be within a mile of Quinault sacred sites. The drive was mostly silent after that, both of us lost in our thoughts as we navigated increasingly remote fire roads. Eventually, the road became too rough even for William's vehicle, and we continued on foot, hiking northwest through towering old-growth forest. Using the GPS coordinates of the structure I'd found earlier as a reference point, we pushed through dense underbrush toward where Benjamin had indicated the Whispering Circle would be. The fog had lifted somewhat but still hung between the trees in spectral wisps. "Did Benjamin tell you about the disappearances?" William asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Some. He mentioned people the Siatko had taken." William nodded. 3 hikers disappeared in this general area last year. Experienced outdoorsmen, all of them. Search and rescue found nothing. Not a backpack, not a boot print, not a candy wrapper. "You think they encountered whatever I saw?" "I think," William said carefully, "that there are forces in these woods that don't appear in our ranger training manuals." We walked another half hour before William stopped abruptly, holding up his hand in the universal signal for silence. I froze, listening. At first I heard nothing beyond the natural sounds of the forest, the soft drip of moisture from leaves, the distant call of a raven. Then I caught it, a low rhythmic sound almost below the threshold of hearing. Like breathing, but deeper, slower than any human respiration. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. William nodded, his expression tense. He pointed ahead where the forest seemed to darken despite the time of day. We proceeded with greater caution, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. The trees ahead suddenly opened into a clearing, and we both stopped at its edge, staring. 7 enormous cedar trees stood in a perfect circle, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each tree had to be at least 12 feet in circumference, their massive trunks covered in moss and lichen that gave them an ancient, almost sentient appearance. The breathing sound was louder here, seeming to emanate from the very center of the circle. But what immediately caught our attention were the man-made additions to this natural wonder. High-definition trail cameras had been mounted to 3 of the sacred trees with large metal screws driven directly into the living wood. Motion sensors were positioned at the perimeter of the circle. Most disturbing of all, a large metal cage-like trap had been placed at the center, partially camouflaged with branches and leaves. "Jesus," William muttered, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "They're actually trying to trap one." I approached one of the cameras, examining how it had been mounted. These screws are at least 4 inches long, driven right into the heartwood. This could kill these ancient trees. "We're taking everything down," William said firmly. "Document it all first for the violation report, then we remove every piece of this equipment." We worked methodically, photographing each piece of unauthorized equipment before carefully removing it. The trap at the center was more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. A reinforced cage with a pressure plate trigger mechanism and what appeared to be a tranquilizer delivery system. "This isn't amateur equipment," I noted as we dismantled it. "This is professional-grade wildlife capture tech, expensive, and completely illegal without proper permits," William added. "Which they definitely don't have for tranquilizers." As we worked, I became increasingly aware of the breathing sound that permeated the clearing. It didn't seem to come from any specific direction, but rather from everywhere at once, as if the air itself were alive. More unsettling was the feeling of being watched. a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that wouldn't subside no matter how often I scanned our surroundings. "William," I said quietly as we finished packing the last of the equipment, "something doesn't feel right." He nodded, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the trees around us. "I know, we need to." A sharp crack interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under significant weight. We both turned toward the source of the noise. At the eastern edge of the clearing, nothing was visible, but the feeling of being observed intensified dramatically. "Hello?" William called out, his hand moving to the sidearm he carried for protection against aggressive wildlife. "This is the Forest Service. Identify yourself." No response came, but another branch cracked, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. Whatever was out there was large enough to make substantial noise and moving with incredible speed to circle us so quickly. 3 distinct knocks echoed through the trees, the same pattern I'd heard before. William's eyes widened. "What was that?" Before I could answer, 3 more knocks responded from a different direction, then another set from somewhere else. The sounds were coming from all around us now, creating a disorienting cacophony. "We need to leave," I said, hefting my pack and the bag of confiscated equipment. Now, we moved quickly toward the path we'd taken into the clearing but stopped short at the tree line. Through the fog that had begun to thicken again, a massive silhouette was barely visible, at least 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, standing perfectly still about 30 yards ahead. "Oh my God," William breathed. The figure didn't move, but the knocking sounds intensified, coming faster now, no longer in sets of 3 but in rapid, urgent patterns. "This way," I said, pulling William toward what seemed like a gap in the perimeter of watchers. We pushed through the underbrush, moving as fast as we could while carrying our heavy packs and equipment. The terrain sloped downward, becoming increasingly steep and difficult to navigate. The fog had grown so dense that visibility was reduced to mere feet, forcing us to stay close to avoid separation. The knocking followed us, always just out of sight, sometimes seeming to come from directly above. Occasionally, through gaps in the fog, I caught glimpses of dark shapes moving through the trees with astonishing speed and grace for their size. "They're hurting us," William gasped as we stumbled down the increasingly steep slope. He was right. Every time we tried to veer back toward the direction of our vehicle, the knocking would intensify from that direction, forcing us to change course. We were being deliberately driven deeper into the forest, away from familiar territory. The slope suddenly gave way beneath our feet, sending us sliding down a muddy embankment. We tumbled through ferns and underbrush before coming to a stop at the bottom of a small ravine. The confiscated equipment scattered around us, some pieces breaking open on impact. As I struggled to my feet, a new sound cut through the forest, a high-pitched, keening wail that raised the hair on my arms and sent a primal surge of fear through my body. It wasn't human, wasn't any animal I recognized, and seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. "What is that?" William's voice shook slightly as he retrieved his fallen pack. "I don't know," I admitted, helping him gather the scattered equipment. "But I don't think we should be here when whatever's making it arrives." The ravine narrowed ahead of us, forming a natural path that wound between steep earthen walls. With no better option, we followed it, moving as quickly as the treacherous footing would allow. The fog seemed to be following us, flowing down the ravine like spectral water. We'd gone perhaps a quarter mile when William suddenly stopped, pointing ahead. "Look!" Through the mist, a structure loomed, another of the wooden pyramids I'd seen before but much larger, at least 15 feet tall. This one was more elaborate, with smaller branches woven between the larger supports, creating a complex lattice. "It's like the one you found," William said, approaching it cautiously. "No," I corrected him, noticing the differences. "It's more deliberate, more complex." As we drew closer, I saw that objects had been woven into the structure. Strips of cloth, small animal bones, polished stones, and, most disturbingly, what appeared to be man-made items. A watch with a shattered face, a camera lens, a hiking boot. "These are from the missing hikers," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have to be." The knocking had stopped, replaced by an unnatural silence. Even the ambient sounds of the forest, insects, birds, the rustle of leaves had gone quiet. The only sound was our own breathing and the soft drip of moisture from the trees. That's when I noticed the carvings, dozens of them etched into the trunks of the surrounding trees. The same symbol Benjamin had shown me, repeated over and over but with subtle variations. Some had additional lines, some were partially inverted, but all shared the same basic structure, a vertical line intersected by 3 horizontals. "William," I said, my mouth dry with fear. "We shouldn't be here," he nodded, already backing away from the structure. "Let's go. We can follow the ravine. It should eventually." 4 loud, deliberate knocks cut through the silence. I froze, remembering Benjamin's warning. 4 knocks means a crossing is beginning. "Run," I said, grabbing William's arm. "We need to run, now." We abandoned the equipment, keeping only our essential packs as we sprinted down the ravine. The 4-knock pattern repeated, louder this time, reverberating through the narrow passage. The fog thickened impossibly, reducing visibility to almost nothing. William was a few steps ahead of me when he suddenly disappeared from view with a startled cry. I skidded to a stop at the edge of what appeared to be a sinkhole that had opened in the ravine floor. It was perhaps 12 feet across, its edges crumbling and unstable. "William," I called, dropping to my knees at the edge. His voice echoed up from the darkness. "I'm okay. It's not too deep. Maybe 15 feet. But I think I've broken my ankle. I can't climb out." I unslung my pack, reaching for the rope we always carried for emergencies. "Hold on. I'll pull you up." As I prepared to lower the rope, the 4-knock sequence sounded again, so close it seemed to come from just behind me. I spun around, but the fog was a solid white wall. Shapes moved within it, massive, indistinct forms circling the sinkhole. The keening wail started again, rising in pitch until it was almost unbearable. The air itself seemed to vibrate, creating a visual distortion like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The fog began to swirl, forming a vortex centered on the sinkhole. "James!" William's voice was panicked now. "Something's down here with me. I can hear it breathing." I lowered the rope as quickly as I could, trying to ignore the shapes that were drawing closer through the fog. "Grab the rope. Tie it around yourself." "I can't see it," he shouted. "The fog's too thick down here." The swirling intensified, the air pressure dropping suddenly, making my ears pop painfully. Through the fog I could now make out distinct figures, at least 7 massive, hair-covered forms forming a circle around the sinkhole. Their features were obscured, but their size and shape were unmistakably similar to what native legends described as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But there was something wrong about them, something in the way they moved, in the strange proportions of their limbs, that suggested they weren't quite solid. As I watched in horror, one seemed to flicker like a bad television signal, momentarily revealing a skeletal structure unlike anything I'd ever seen. "William!" I screamed, still trying to lower the rope into the increasingly fog-filled hole. "Can you see the rope?" His answer came as a terrified scream that cut off abruptly. Then silence. "William!" I called again, my voice breaking. No response came from the hole, but the knocking started once more. 4 beats, repeated in a rhythm that now sounded almost like language. The figures were moving closer, their forms becoming more distinct through the swirling fog. I had seconds to make a decision, try to reach William, or save myself. Training and friendship demanded I stay, but some deeper instinct, something primal and connected to survival, screamed at me to run. In the end, it was Benjamin's talisman that decided for me. As the figures closed in, I felt it grow hot in my pocket, painfully so, like a coal burning through the fabric. I pulled it out, nearly dropping it from the heat. The carved symbol was glowing with a faint blue light, pulsing in time with the 4-knock rhythm that filled the air. Acting on pure instinct, I held it up toward the approaching figures. The effect was immediate. The figures stopped their advance, the keening wail faltering. The one directly across the sinkhole from me, larger than the others, with a distinctive crest of hair on its head, made a gesture with its massive hand, pointing first at the talisman, then at me, then toward the ravine behind me. The message was unmistakable. I was being offered a chance to leave. "I can't leave William," I called out, my voice sounding small against the otherworldly wailing. The largest figure made that same gesture again, more emphatically this time. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, small stones and dirt sliding into the sinkhole. The edges were crumbling, expanding the hole. "William!" I shouted one last time, desperately lowering the rope further, but there was no response. The talisman in my hand pulsed brighter, almost painfully hot now. The lead figure across from me suddenly let out a sound that was neither human nor animal, a deep, resonant bellow that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. The others joined in, creating a harmonized sound that made my vision blur. With the hole rapidly expanding toward where I knelt, I made the hardest decision of my life. I stuffed the talisman back in my pocket and ran, following the direction the creature had indicated, back up the ravine. Behind me, the bellowing changed to a rhythmic chanting, punctuated by those 4 knocks that Benjamin had warned me about. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks, pushing through dense underbrush when the ravine ended. I had no idea where I was or which direction might lead back to civilization. My only goal was distance, putting as much space as possible between myself and whatever ceremony was occurring back at the sinkhole. Night was falling by the time I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed against the trunk of a massive cedar, gasping for breath, my muscles trembling from exhaustion. Only then did I realize I was still clutching my satellite phone, standard ranger equipment I'd completely forgotten in the chaos. With shaking hands, I dialed the emergency channel for the ranger station. After several tense moments, Elijah's voice came through, broken by static. "James, is that you? Where are you guys? You missed 2 check-ins." "Elijah," I gasped. "William. He's gone. I need search and rescue. Emergency extraction." "Gone? What do you mean gone? What happened?" Alarm filled his voice. "Accident. Sinkhole." I couldn't bring myself to mention the other things I'd seen. "I'm lost. Can you track this signal?" "Signal's weak, but we've got you. Stay where you are. Helicopters being dispatched. ETA 90 minutes if weather holds." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. "Hurry!" As darkness enveloped the forest, I huddled against the cedar, jumping at every sound. The helicopter couldn't come soon enough, but it never arrived. The weather turned, as it often does in the Olympics, with frightening speed. What had been light fog thickened into a dense soup that no aircraft could safely navigate. The wind rose, bringing heavy rain that drummed against the forest canopy and dripped through to soak me to the skin. Elijah's increasingly worried voice informed me that the rescue had been delayed until morning. I was on my own for the night. The rain continued unabated, soaking through my ranger jacket despite its waterproof claims. I'd managed to find partial shelter beneath the broad branches of the cedar, but water still found its way down my neck and into my boots. The temperature was dropping, and I knew hypothermia was a real risk. Using the small emergency kit from my pack, I created a makeshift shelter with the emergency blanket and some fallen branches. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The satellite phone's battery was running low, so I turned it off to conserve power, promising Elijah I'd check in at dawn. Alone in the gathering darkness, every sound of the forest took on new menace. The rational part of my mind, the trained ranger who knew these woods, tried to catalog each noise, attributing it to known wildlife or natural phenomena. But another part, the part that had witnessed William's disappearance and the impossible beings that surrounded the sinkhole, remained on high alert. The wooden talisman Benjamin had given me still rested in my pocket, no longer hot but maintaining a subtle warmth against my leg. I took it out, studying it in the dim light. The carving seemed different somehow, the lines deeper, more pronounced than I remembered. "What are you?" I whispered, running my thumb over the symbol. As if in response, 3 distinct knocks sounded in the distance, the warning pattern Benjamin had described. I clutched the talisman tighter, my heart racing. Something was out there, moving through the storm-lashed forest. I doused my small light, relying on my other senses. The rain masked many sounds, but I could still detect movement, something large circling my position, keeping just outside the range of clear visibility. Another series of knocks, closer this time, followed by a low, rumbling vocalization that was definitely not from any animal native to these woods. I pressed myself against the cedar trunk, trying to make myself as small as possible. "I mean no harm," I called out, unsure if what stalked me could understand human speech. "I just want to leave your territory." The movement stopped. For several long minutes there was nothing but the sound of rain. Then, unexpectedly, a response. 3 soft knocks, almost gentle, from directly behind the cedar I was leaning against. I scrambled away, nearly losing my emergency shelter in the process. Turning to face the tree, I saw nothing at first. Then a massive shape detached itself from the darkness, stepping forward with surprising grace for its size. In the dim light, I could make out only its silhouette, at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a distinctive crest of hair on its head. Its face remained in shadow, but I could feel its gaze upon me, studying me with what felt like intelligence. It was one of them. One of the beings from the sinkhole. But it was alone, and its posture seemed different. Less threatening, more curious. Slowly, deliberately I reached into my pocket and withdrew the talisman, holding it up between us. The figure made a sound, something between a hum and a purr, and extended one massive hand, palm up. The gesture was unmistakable. "You want this back?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature didn't move, its hand remaining extended. After a moment's hesitation, I placed the talisman in its palm, half expecting those massive fingers to close around my hand, but the touch never came. Instead, the creature withdrew its hand, examining the wooden carving. Then, to my astonishment, it produced something from what appeared to be a crude pouch made of woven cedar bark at its waist. It held this new object out to me. Cautiously, I reached for it. It was another carving, similar to the first but with significant differences. The vertical line remained, but now there were 5 horizontal lines instead of 3, and small circular marks at various intersections. The creature made another sound, this one almost musical, rising and falling in a pattern that tantalizingly suggested language. It pointed to the new talisman, then to me, then to the northwest. "You want me to go that way?" I asked, pointing in the direction it had indicated. The massive head dipped once in what could only be interpreted as a nod. "William," I said, miming the action of falling into a hole. "My friend. Is he?" The creature went still, its breathing the only sound beyond the rain. Then it raised one hand, making a complex gesture I couldn't interpret. When it finished, it pointed to the new talisman in my hand, then northwest again, more urgently this time. I understood then. It was trying to help me leave. Whether out of compassion or simply to remove me from its territory, I couldn't tell. "Thank you," I said, tucking the new talisman into my pocket. The creature retreated a step, then another, beginning to fade into the darkness. Before it disappeared completely, it made one final sound, 4 sharp knocks, that sent a chill through me despite our seemingly peaceful interaction. A warning? A farewell? I couldn't be sure. But as its massive form melted into the night, I felt the weight of its presence linger, as if it had left some part of itself with me. Sleep was impossible after the encounter. I huddled in my makeshift shelter, the new talisman clutched tightly in my hand, listening to the rain and the forest sounds until the faintest gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. With the first light, I activated the satellite phone, relieved to find it still had enough charge for one call. Elijah answered immediately. "James, thank God. Rescue team is mobilizing now. Weather's cleared enough for the helicopter. Stay where you are." "No," I said, looking at the talisman. "I need to head northwest. There's a clearer area for landing there." "James, protocol says you should stay put. Your current position is—" "I'm moving northwest," I interrupted, a certainty I couldn't explain driving me. "Track my signal. I'll keep the phone on until it dies." Without waiting for his response, I gathered my few remaining supplies and began moving in the direction the creature had indicated. The forest was dense, the ground slick with rain and treacherous with hidden roots, but I moved as quickly as I dared. After about an hour of hiking, the trees began to thin. The terrain changed, sloping upward toward what appeared to be a ridge. As I climbed, I realized I recognized the formation. It was one of the distinctive ridgelines visible from the main ranger station. Somehow, the creature had directed me toward a landmark that would help me orient myself. I reached the top of the ridge as the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the valley below. In the distance, perhaps 3 miles away, I could see a road, a logging access route that would connect eventually to the main highway. The sound of a helicopter reached me, growing louder as it approached my position. I waved my arms, making myself as visible as possible on the exposed ridgeline. The Forest Service chopper spotted me quickly, hovering overhead before setting down in a relatively flat area about 50 yards away. 2 rangers I recognized from search and rescue operations jumped out, rushing toward me with expressions of relief and concern. Behind them came Lucas from the permit office, his face grim. "James," the lead rescuer called over the thrum of the helicopter blades. "Are you hurt? Where's William?" "Gone," I said simply, the events of the previous day washing over me anew. "There was an accident, a sinkhole. I couldn't reach him." They exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. "We'll send a team back to search," the lead rescuer assured me. "Can you direct us to the location?" I hesitated, my hand closing around the talisman in my pocket. The memory of those beings surrounding the sinkhole, of the strange ceremony that seemed to be occurring, filled me with dread. "I'll try," I said finally. But I got turned around in the storm. "I'm not sure I can find the exact spot again." It wasn't entirely a lie. The forest had a way of hiding its secrets, and I suspected that even with GPS coordinates and detailed maps, that sinkhole, and whatever had taken William, would not be found unless it wanted to be. As they led me to the helicopter, Lucas pulled me aside. "James, we found the Olympic Project's base camp this morning, completely abandoned. Equipment still there, vehicles parked but no people, not a single one." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "All of them? Missing?" Lucas nodded, his expression troubled. 5 researchers, no signs of struggle, no evidence of where they went. It's like they just walked away from everything, or were taken, I thought but didn't say. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying me back to safety and civilization, I looked down at the vast green expanse of the Olympic forest. From this height, it seemed peaceful, ordinary, just trees and mountains and mist. But I knew better now. I knew what walked those ancient paths, what watched from the shadows between worlds. And as we banked toward the ranger station, I caught a glimpse of something on a distant ridge, 7 tall figures standing in a perfect circle, their massive forms unmistakable even from this distance. They didn't move, didn't try to hide. They simply watched as the helicopter carried me away. I said nothing to the others who were focused on the controls and the radio. This secret wasn't mine to share, at least not yet. First, I needed to understand what I'd experienced, what the talisman in my pocket meant, and most importantly, what had happened to William. The beings had let me go for a reason. The question was, why? 3 weeks passed. The official search for William turned up nothing. No body, no equipment, no sign that he'd ever fallen into a sinkhole. The area I'd led them to showed no evidence of the ravine I described or the wooden structure I'd seen. It was as if that entire section of forest had somehow changed or been replaced with an alternate version of itself. The Olympic Project researchers remained missing as well, their disappearance becoming a media sensation that brought unwanted attention to our quiet corner of Washington. Journalists, amateur Bigfoot hunters, and the merely curious flooded the nearby towns, all hoping to be the ones to solve the mystery. I gave the official statement I'd rehearsed with the Forest Service legal team. William and I had separated briefly while documenting illegal research equipment. I'd heard him call out, found a sinkhole, but couldn't reach him before the weather turned. Simple, tragic, believable. I said nothing about footprints that disappeared mid-stride. Nothing about wooden structures or strange carvings. Nothing about 8-foot-tall beings that moved between worlds. Those details remained locked inside me, emerging only in the nightmares that now plagued my sleep. I'd been placed on administrative leave, standard procedure after a traumatic incident, they said, but I suspected they wanted to keep me away from the investigation and the media. I spent most days in my cabin, staring at the forest beyond my windows, wondering what secrets it held just beyond the veil of everyday perception. The talisman the creature had given me remained in my possession, hidden in a drawer beside my bed. I'd tried researching its symbols online, in books about Native American imagery, even in academic papers about Pacific Northwest indigenous cultures. Nothing matched exactly, though certain Quinault and Salish designs showed similarities. Benjamin hadn't answered his door when I'd driven out to his cabin a week after my rescue. The place had looked abandoned, though his garden remained meticulously tended. I had left a note but received no response. Then, exactly 3 weeks after William's disappearance, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of 3 distinct knocks on my cabin door. I lay frozen in bed, listening. The knocks came again, the same pattern I'd heard in the forest. Warning knocks, Benjamin had called them. Moving silently, I retrieved my flashlight and the talisman from the bedside drawer. The wooden carving felt warm in my palm, pulsing faintly like something alive. Another set of 3 knocks, more insistent this time. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called. Though I suspected no human stood on my porch, no answer came, but when I cautiously pulled back the curtain of the small window beside the door, I saw nothing but darkness. No massive shape, no glowing eyes, just the empty porch illuminated by my porch light. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The talisman held tightly in my left hand. Benjamin stood there, his weathered face grave in the yellow porch light. "You're alive," I breathed, relief washing over me. "More or less," he replied cryptically. "May I come in? We have much to discuss, and little time." I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved with a stiffness I hadn't noticed before, his normally fluid grace replaced by careful, measured steps. As he passed me, I caught a strange scent, the same musky odor I'd detected in the clearing with the wooden structure. "You've seen them," Benjamin said, settling into a chair at my small kitchen table. It wasn't a question. "Yes." I sat across from him, placing the talisman on the table between us. "And they gave me this." Benjamin's eyes widened slightly as he studied the carving. "A passage mark," he murmured. "They have chosen you." "Chosen me for what?" "To be a messenger, a bridge." He touched the talisman with one finger, tracing the intricate pattern. "This is very old magic, Ranger, very powerful." "I don't understand any of this," I admitted. "William is gone. 5 researchers are missing. I saw things that shouldn't exist, and now you're telling me I've been chosen?" Benjamin's dark eyes held mine. "The Siatko exist in a world alongside ours, not fully separate but not fully joined. Think of it as a veil between realities that occasionally grows thin in certain places. The Whispering Circle is one such place, a doorway." "And William? The researchers, they were, what, taken through this doorway?" "The researchers violated sacred space despite warnings. They were taken as punishment." Benjamin's voice hardened. "But your friend William, that was different. He was taken because they needed him." A chill ran through me. "Needed him for what?" "Exchange," Benjamin said simply. "Balance must be maintained between worlds. When one crosses over, another must return." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "Are you saying they took William so someone else could come back?" Benjamin nodded slowly. "The world is changing, Ranger. Human development, climate shifts, destruction of ancient forests. These things are damaging the boundary between our world and theirs. The Siatko are the guardians of that boundary. They have maintained it for thousands of years. But now they need help." "Human help? My help?" "They have chosen you to understand them, to speak for them." Benjamin gestured to the talisman. "That mark grants you safe passage. You can move between worlds without being harmed." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Are you telling me William was sacrificed so I could become some kind of ambassador to Bigfoot?" Benjamin's expression darkened. "Your friend's fate is not yet determined. The passage goes both ways. With the proper knowledge, the proper ritual, he might be returned." Hope surged within me. "How? Tell me how to bring him back." "It is dangerous," Benjamin warned. "Few humans have ever entered their world willingly and returned unchanged. And the exchange must still be honored. Someone must remain if he is to come back." "I'll go," I said without hesitation. I'll take his place. Benjamin studied me, his expression unreadable. Perhaps. But there is another possibility. The one who has already returned might be sent back. Someone's already come through? Who? Benjamin's gaze remained steady on mine. Me. The cabin suddenly seemed too small, the air too thick. What are you saying? 3 months ago, I was dying, cancer, spreading through my bones. I went to the whispering circle to make my final prayers, to prepare for the journey to the next world. Benjamin's voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, almost like a chant. The Hietko came to me there. They offered a bargain, healing in exchange for service. I agreed. They healed your cancer? I asked, skeptical despite everything I'd witnessed. They did more than that. Benjamin held out his hands, turning them palms up. In the dim light of my cabin, I could see that the skin of his palms had a strange texture, almost like fine fur rather than human skin. They changed me, made me part of both worlds so I could move between them. I recoiled instinctively, pushing my chair back from the table. Do not fear, Ranger. I am still Benjamin, still Quinault, but I am also something else now. A bridge, like you are meant to be. He lowered his hands. The difference is that I cannot stay in this world much longer. The change is progressing. Soon I will belong fully to their reality. And William, can he survive there? For a time. But eventually, he too would change, become like them, or die resisting the transformation. Benjamin's expression softened. That is why I have come tonight, to offer you a choice. What choice? Return with me to the Whispering Circle. Complete the ritual that will open the doorway. Then decide, enter their world to retrieve your friend, accepting that one of you must remain, or become the bridge between worlds that they have chosen you to be. I stared at the talisman on the table, its intricate carving seeming to shift and move in the dim light. And if I refuse, then William remains lost forever. The researchers too. And the boundary between worlds continues to weaken until eventually, the Sietko will have no choice but to defend their territory more aggressively. Benjamin's voice had taken on an otherworldly quality, deeper than seemed possible from his slight frame. When? I asked, already knowing I had no real choice. Now, tonight. The moon is dark. The veil is thinnest when no light crosses between worlds. I gathered my gear silently. Flashlight, compass, knife, water, the essentials for forest travel. Benjamin watched without comment, his eyes reflecting the light oddly, like those of a nocturnal animal. As we stepped out into the night, the forest beyond my cabin seemed alive with movement. Shadows shifting between trees, branches swaying against the wind. The usual night sounds, owls, insects, the rustle of small mammals, were absent, replaced by an expectant silence. They are watching, Benjamin said quietly. They have been watching you since you returned. I thought of the dreams I'd been having, dreams of running through endless forest, pursued by something I could never quite see. Dreams of William calling my name from deep underground, his voice growing fainter with each passing night. Let's go, I said, gripping the talisman tightly. Show me how to bring him back. Benjamin led the way, moving through the darkened forest with unnatural confidence. I followed, flashlight beam bouncing over roots and rocks, illuminating our path in brief, disconnected segments. Despite the difficult terrain, Benjamin never faltered, never hesitated at a fork in the trail or questioned his direction. We walked for what seemed like hours. Though my watch showed only 40 minutes had passed when Benjamin finally stopped at the edge of a small clearing. It wasn't the Whispering Circle. This place was smaller, unremarkable except for a single ancient cedar at its center, its massive trunk split down the middle as if struck by lightning long ago. Here, Benjamin said, approaching the split cedar. This is a minor crossing point. Simpler than the Whispering Circle, but sufficient for our needs. From a pouch at his waist, he produced several items. A small clay pot containing what looked like red ochre, a bundle of dried herbs, and a curved knife with a bone handle. He began to work methodically, painting symbols on the inside of the split trunk with the ochre, then burning the herbs in a small depression at the tree's base. As the pungent smoke rose, Benjamin began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, not Quino or any native tongue I'd ever heard, but something older, more primal. The syllables seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with meaning just beyond my comprehension. The smoke from the burning herbs thickened, behaving in ways smoke shouldn't, forming distinct shapes, curling in spiral patterns that defied the still night air. As Benjamin's chanting intensified, the split in the cedar trunk appeared to widen, darkness pooling within it like liquid shadow. 3 knocks echoed from the forest behind us, answered by 3 more from a different direction, then another set, until the clearing was surrounded by the rhythmic pattern. Benjamin's chanting grew louder, more urgent, his voice shifting between his own and something deeper, almost growling. The talisman in my hand grew hot, the carved lines beginning to glow with the same blue light I'd seen in the forest. The split in the cedar widened further, revealing not the expected hollow inside an old tree but what appeared to be a tunnel, stretching impossibly far into darkness. Benjamin's chant reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. The knocking ceased with it, leaving an absolute silence that seemed to press against my ears. "It is open," Benjamin said, his voice strained, "but not for long. You must decide now, Ranger. Enter and find your friend, knowing one of you must remain, or accept your role as bridge and learn what they would teach you." I stared into the darkness beyond the split cedar, the talisman pulsing in my hand like a second heartbeat. William was in there somewhere, my friend, my colleague, lost in a reality I couldn't comprehend. The thought of him alone in that alien world was unbearable. But something else pulled at me too. The knowledge Benjamin had offered, the mystery of these beings who existed alongside humanity yet remained hidden for millennia. The talisman in my hand represented a unique opportunity, a choice few humans had ever been offered. "If I go in," I said slowly, "how do I find him? How do we get back?" "Follow the talisman. It will lead you to him." Benjamin gestured to the glowing carving in my hand. "As for returning, that is more difficult. The doorway will remain open until dawn, but passing back through requires permission." "From whom?" "From the elders, the oldest of the Siatko." Benjamin's expression was grave. "They will demand a price, Ranger. They always do." I took a deep breath, looking once more into the impossible darkness beyond the split tree. William would have come for me. I knew that with absolute certainty. "I'm going in," I said, stepping toward the opening. Benjamin caught my arm. "Wait. There is something else you should know." His eyes had changed completely now, the whites gone, replaced by a deep amber color that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Time moves differently there. What feels like hours may be days here, or mere minutes. Do not linger, no matter what wonders or horrors you witness." I nodded, pulling gently free of his grip. "Will you be here when I return?" A sad smile crossed his face. "No, Ranger, my time in your world ends tonight. When the doorway closes, I will remain on the other side, completing my transformation." He touched the talisman in my hand. "But perhaps, someday, you will see me again, if you choose to use this gift they have given you." Without further words, I turned and stepped into the gap in the cedar trunk, the talisman held before me like a shield. The darkness enveloped me immediately, a cold sensation washing over my skin like plunging into deep water. For a moment I felt suspended, weightless, unable to determine up from down, forward from back. Then my feet touched solid ground, and the darkness retreated enough for me to see my surroundings. I stood in a forest that resembled the Olympic wilderness yet differed in subtle, unsettling ways. The trees were similar species but grew in impossible configurations, their trunks twisting and joining in ways that defied natural laws. The undergrowth pulsed with faint bioluminescence, casting an eerie blue-green light over everything. The air felt thicker, richer with oxygen, making my head swim slightly. Sounds came muffled, as if passing through water before reaching my ears, and everywhere there was that strange musky scent I'd detected before. Stronger now, permeating everything. The talisman in my hand pulsed, the blue light brightening then dimming in a steady rhythm. When I turned in a complete circle, I noticed the light grew strongest when I faced what appeared to be a path leading deeper into the strange forest. Following the talisman's guidance, I began to walk. Time lost meaning as I traveled. The perpetual twilight never brightened or darkened, giving no indication of passing hours. The path wound through increasingly bizarre terrain, groves of trees growing in perfect concentric circles, clearings where the ground itself seemed to breathe, streams that flowed uphill against gravity. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of movement at the periphery of my vision, massive shapes moving with surprising grace through the twisted forest. They never approached directly, but I sensed their awareness of me, their curiosity and caution. The talisman led me finally to a valley unlike anything I'd ever seen. Massive stone monoliths stood in formation, each carved with symbols similar to those on my talisman. Between them, dozens of wooden structures like the ones I'd encountered in my world rose toward the strange, starless sky above. And there, in the center of the valley, was a village, if that word could apply to the complex arrangement of woven branches, earth mounds, and stone chambers that housed what I now knew with certainty were the beings native legends called Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but who called themselves Kietko. They moved about their settlement with purpose, gathering, building, communicating through that complex system of knocks and vocalizations I'd heard before. They varied in size and appearance, some reaching nearly 10 feet tall, others more modestly sized but still towering over human height. Their bodies were covered in hair ranging from deep russet to nearly black, with distinctive crests marking what appeared to be elders or leaders. The talisman pulled me forward, its light now almost blindingly bright. The Shiatko noticed me as I approached, their activities stopping as they turned to watch the human walking into their midst. None made threatening moves, but I felt the weight of dozens of intelligent non-human gazes assessing me. At the far side of the village, I saw a structure larger than the others, a dome of intricately woven branches reinforced with stone and earth. The talisman pulled me toward it with increasing urgency. As I approached, 3 massive Siatako stepped into my path. They were clearly guards of some kind, their posture alert and wary. The center one, distinguished by gray streaks in its otherwise black hair, made a series of gestures followed by 3 deliberate knocks against a wooden staff it carried. Instinctively, I held up the talisman. The blue light illuminated the guards' features, revealing faces that straddled the boundary between human and ape, yet were entirely neither, something unique, something evolved along a different path than either. The guards exchanged what could only be described as glances, then stepped aside, allowing me to approach the domed structure. The entrance was low, forcing me to duck as I entered a space that seemed impossibly larger inside than its exterior suggested. The interior was illuminated by the same bioluminescent plants I'd seen throughout the forest, their light revealing a circular chamber with a depression in the center, like an amphitheater. And there, lying on a bed of moss in the central depression, was William. He appeared to be sleeping, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He seemed uninjured, his ranger uniform dirty but intact. As I rushed toward him, I noticed changes that made me falter. His beard had grown significantly, much more than 3 weeks would account for, and there was a streak of gray at his temples that hadn't been there before. "William," I called softly, kneeling beside him. "William, wake up. It's James." His eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to disbelief, then joy. "James? Where are we?" "It's complicated," I said, helping him sit up. "But I'm here to take you home." William looked around, taking in the impossible structure surrounding us. "I remember falling, then darkness, then waking up here. They've been studying me, I think, communicating in their way." He rubbed his temples. "How long have I been gone? It feels like months." 3 weeks, I told him, though Benjamin's warning about the different flow of time made me wonder if William's perception was more accurate. "Can you walk? We need to leave before dawn." "Dawn?" William looked confused. "There's no dawn here. No sun, no moon, no stars. Just endless twilight." "In our world," I clarified, "the doorway closes at dawn." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You found a way back." Before I could respond, a sound like rolling thunder filled the chamber. The entrance darkened as 3 enormous Kiatko entered, larger than any I'd seen, their crests pronounced and their bearing regal. The elders Benjamin had mentioned. They arranged themselves in a semicircle before us, their amber eyes studying us with unmistakable intelligence. The center figure, the largest, with silver-streaked fur and a scar running down one side of its face, made a series of gestures, then pointed directly at the talisman in my hand. "I think they want to talk to you," William whispered. The elder Kyatko knelt, bringing its massive head closer to our level. With deliberate movements, it reached out one enormous hand, palm up, the same gesture the forest Kyatko had made when giving me the talisman. I placed the wooden carving in its palm, watching as its long fingers closed gently around the object. The elder examined it, then made a sound I hadn't heard before, a series of clicks and low hums that seemed to form a pattern. To my astonishment, William responded with similar sounds, crude and clearly unpracticed, but recognizable enough that the elder's eyes widened in surprise. "You can understand them?" I asked, incredulous. William nodded. "Not completely, but after weeks here, yes, some of it. They've been teaching me." The elder made another series of sounds, more complex this time. "He says..." William hesitated, concentrating. "He says only one of us can return through the doorway. The balance must be maintained." My heart sank. Benjamin had warned me, but hearing it confirmed made the reality inescapable. "Tell him I'll stay. You go back." William shook his head. "No, James, you don't understand what this place is, what they are." His eyes had an intensity I'd never seen before. "They're not just another species. They're guardians of something ancient, something vital. The boundary between worlds isn't just physical, it's metaphysical. Spiritual." The elder Kyatko made another sound, holding the talisman toward me. "He says you were chosen," William translated. "Marked as a bridge walker, someone who can move between worlds without disrupting the balance." "Then I can take you back without someone staying?" I asked hopefully. William's expression was pained as he listened to more of the elder's communication. "No, someone must remain. But he says it doesn't have to be either of us." "What do you mean?" I asked, hope flickering. William gestured toward the entrance where a figure now stood. Benjamin, though changed almost beyond recognition. His body had elongated, his frame broader, patches of dark hair now covering much of his visible skin. His face retained human features, but they were subtly altered, shifted toward something more primal, more aligned with the Sahatko around us. "Benjamin has completed his transformation," William explained. "He chose this, welcomed it. His human life was ending, and they offered him a new beginning." Benjamin approached, moving with the same fluid grace as the Sahatko despite his transitional form. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, resonant, but still recognizably his. "I told you my time in your world was ending, Ranger. This is where I belong now." The elder made a complex series of sounds, touching the talisman and then pointing to both William and me. "He says we can both return," William translated. "But there is a price beyond Benjamin's sacrifice." "What price?" I asked, wary. William listened as the elder continued. "We must serve as witnesses, bridges between worlds. We must protect the secret places, the crossing points, ensure humans don't violate the boundaries. He wants us to be, what? Guardians of Bigfoot territory?" I asked, trying to understand. "More than that," Benjamin interjected. As a park ranger, I thought I'd seen everything until I found the tent with no camper inside, but dinner still warm on the table. The steam still rose from the can of beans, the camping stove's flame flickering in the breeze. A half-eaten protein bar lay next to an open journal, the pen resting diagonally across the page as if dropped mid-sentence. "My name is Cooper Jensen. For 8 years, I've patrolled the eastern slopes of Mount Hood in Oregon, and in that time I've handled everything from lost hikers to aggressive wildlife to illegal campsites. But this was different." "Hello?" I called, my voice carrying through the dense Douglas firs surrounding the small clearing. No response except the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. "Forest Service. Anyone here?" The tent was a high-end north face, properly staked with gear meticulously organized inside, sleeping bag unrolled, headlamp hanging from the ceiling hook. Hiking boots placed neatly at the entrance. Nothing about this scene suggested a hasty departure. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Jensen at Checkpoint 17. I've got an abandoned campsite in the Black Ridge area, approximately 2 miles east of Wadham Lake. No sign of the camper." "Copy that, Cooper," responded Angel, our dispatch coordinator. "Any signs of wildlife disturbance?" I surveyed the ground, looking for tracks or signs of a struggle. "Negative. Everything's intact. Food's still warm. It's like they just vanished minutes ago." "All right, hold position. I'll send Waylon to your coordinates for backup." "Could be they just went to answer nature's call." "Maybe," I replied, though something in my gut told me otherwise. "I'll check the perimeter." The evening sun filtered through the canopy as I circled the campsite, flashlight in hand despite the remaining daylight. My training taught me to look for broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, or any sign indicating which direction the camper might have gone. 20 feet from the tent, I found the first anomaly. A perfect impression in the soft earth, a footprint, but not from any hiking boot. This print was massive, nearly 18 inches long and incredibly deep, suggesting tremendous weight. The distinctive shape showed 5 toes, but the proportions were all wrong for a human. I'd seen bear tracks countless times, but this wasn't Urson either. No claw marks, wrong pad formation. A cold sensation crawled up my spine as I noticed a second print, then a third, creating a trail heading deeper into the forest. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every ranger in the Pacific Northwest has. Tales of the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the creature of Native American legend and campfire stories. Most rangers considered them just that, stories. Something to explain strange noises in the night or glimpses of wildlife in poor visibility. I'd always been skeptical myself, but these tracks, they weren't like anything documented in our wildlife guides. As I contemplated this, a sound broke through the forest ambience. A long, low moan that seemed to reverberate through the trees themselves. Not a bear, not an elk. Something with vocal cords capable of a sound that struck a primal chord of fear within me. My radio crackled. "Cooper, Waylon here. I'm about half a mile out from your position. Everything's still quiet?" I hesitated, unsure how to describe what I'd found without sounding like I'd lost my mind. "Waylon, I've found some unusual tracks. Large, humanoid, but bigger than any human." There was a pause before he responded. "Probably just a hoax. Remember those hikers last summer who planted fake Bigfoot prints near Lost Lake?" "Yeah, maybe," I said, unconvinced. The depth of these impressions would require hundreds of pounds to create, not something easily faked. "I'm going to follow them a bit, see if I can find our missing camper." "Cooper, protocol says to wait for backup. Just 100 yards or so. The camper might be injured." I made the decision knowing it wasn't by the book, but the cooling food suggested whatever happened was recent. Minutes could matter. I followed the tracks, marking my path with trail tape. The footprints maintained a consistent stride length of about 6 feet, an impossible distance for a human to step naturally. As I moved deeper into the forest, the light dimmed under the thickening canopy, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The tracks led to a small stream where they disappeared. I scanned the opposite bank but saw no continuation. Puzzled, I was about to turn back when I noticed something snagged on a branch hanging low over the water. A scrap of fabric, blue flannel, torn as if ripped from a shirt. Just as I reached for it, I heard a sound from behind me. A heavy exhalation, like the breath of something large. Very large. I turned slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. At first, I saw nothing but shadows among the trees. Then the shadows moved. Standing perhaps 40 yards away, partially obscured by a massive pine, was a figure, tall, impossibly tall, covered in dark fur, with broad shoulders and a silhouette unmistakably bipedal yet not human. For a breathless moment we stared at each other, this creature and I, neither moving. Its eyes reflected the dying sunlight, 2 amber orbs watching me with unmistakable intelligence. Then, as if making a decision, it turned and moved away with shocking speed for something so large, disappearing into the deepening shadows of the forest. I stood frozen, my training and experience utterly inadequate for what I'd just witnessed. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Cooper, you there?" "I'm at the campsite." Waylon's voice snapped me back to reality. "Yeah." I managed my mouth dry. "Yeah, I'm by the creek. I'm headed back." "Find anything?" I looked at the direction where the creature had vanished, then at the scrap of blue fabric still fluttering on the branch. "I think we need to call in search and rescue," I said finally. "And Waylon? Tell them to bring extra people." As I made my way back to the campsite, one thought kept circling in my mind. The expression I'd seen in those inhuman eyes hadn't been fear or aggression. It had been warning. The search party arrived just before nightfall. 4 additional rangers, search and rescue volunteers, and 2 sheriff's deputies. Easton, our team lead for the Eastern District, coordinated the effort with his usual military precision. Despite my protests, the official report listed the incident as a possible wildlife encounter with a missing hiker. When I mentioned the tracks and what I'd seen, Easton pulled me aside. "Cooper, I need you focused," he said, his voice low. "These people need to believe we're looking for a lost hiker, not chasing folklore." "I know what I saw, Easton," I insisted, frustration building. "And those tracks aren't from any recognized wildlife." He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Look, we've worked together for what, 5 years? I respect you. But if word gets out that Mount Hood Rangers are hunting Bigfoot, we'll be laughingstocks. Worse, we'll have every cryptid hunter and their cousin trampling through protected land." I couldn't argue with his logic, but it didn't change what I'd seen. As the search teams fanned out with flashlights and thermal imagers, I returned to the stream where I'd encountered the creature. Waylon accompanied me, silent but supportive. At 37, he had a decade on me and had seen his share of unexplained phenomena in these forests. "You really believe it was Sasquatch?" he finally asked as we reached the creek. "I don't know what it was," I admitted. "But I know what it wasn't. Any animal documented in our training." Waylon nodded thoughtfully, sweeping his flashlight across the forest floor. "You know, my grandfather was Warm Springs tribe. He used to tell me stories about the Skookum, their name for the wild man of the mountains." This piqued my interest. "What kind of stories?" "Not the Hollywood monster stuff. In their traditions, the Skookum were guardians of the forest, dangerous if disrespected but not malevolent." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Grandfather claimed to have encountered one when he was young, up near the Blue Mountains. Said it saved him from a landslide." I was about to press for more details when our radios crackled simultaneously. "All units. We've found something." It was Kai, one of the newer rangers. Half-mile north of the campsite, near the old fire lookout. We double-timed it to the location. The old fire lookout was a relic from the 1940s, a wooden structure long abandoned but still standing on a rocky outcropping. As we approached, I saw the clustered flashlights of the search team illuminating something on the ground. Easton was kneeling beside what appeared to be a backpack, its contents scattered. A wallet lay open, revealing a driver's license. "Christian Matheson, 32, from Portland. Our missing camper." "Any sign of Matheson?" I asked, scanning the darkness beyond the lights. "Nothing yet," Easton replied grimly. "But look at this." He pointed his flashlight at the backpack. It had been torn open, not by a knife or along the seams, but ripped apart by something with immense strength. More disturbing were the dark stains that spattered the fabric and surrounding pine needles. "Is that blood?" Waylon asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Landon, one of the deputies, nodded. "Lab will confirm, but yeah, and there's more." He directed his light toward the base of a massive Douglas fir. "Drag marks. Something heavy was pulled that way." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air settled over me. We followed the disturbed ground to a small ravine about 30 yards away. The ravine descended steeply for perhaps 50 feet before leveling out in a natural hollow surrounded by ancient trees. And there, in that hollow, was a structure. Not a human structure. Nothing so planned or geometric. This was a crude shelter formed from fallen logs, broken branches, and what appeared to be moss and bark layered in a way that would repel rain. It resembled nothing so much as a massive, sophisticated bird's nest scaled up to accommodate something of significant size. "What the hell is that?" Kai whispered. No one answered. We were all processing the implications. This was no temporary animal den. This showed planning, construction, purpose. "We need to go down there," I said finally. Easton shook his head. "Too dangerous in the dark. We'll come back at first light with proper equipment and more personnel." As if in response to his words, a sound emerged from the forest beyond the ravine. That same moaning call I'd heard earlier, but now with a rhythmic quality almost like speech. It was answered by another call from the opposite direction, then another, more distant. "There's more than one," Waylon breathed. The search party fell silent, every face painted with the same realization. We were not alone in these woods, and whatever shared them with us was communicating. One of the volunteers broke the silence. "That's it, I'm out." He backed away, nearly tripping over a root. Others looked ready to follow. "Nobody's going anywhere alone," Easton commanded. "We stick together, make our way back to the vehicles. We'll return in daylight." As we retreated, I lingered at the edge of the ravine, staring down at the crude shelter. A flicker of movement caught my eye, something shifting in the shadows near the structure. I raised my flashlight, but Waylon grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he warned. "If that's what you saw earlier, light might provoke it." I lowered the flashlight but couldn't tear my gaze away. In the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy, I could just make out a massive figure moving with deliberate care around the shelter. It paused, and again I felt the weight of that intelligent gaze finding me in the darkness. Then it made a sound. Not the moaning call from before, but something more deliberate. 3 distinct vocalizations that raised the hair on my neck because they carried the unmistakable cadence of language. "Cooper, come on," Waylon urged, tugging my arm. I reluctantly turned away. But as we hiked back toward the vehicles, questions tumbled through my mind. If these creatures could build shelters and communicate, what else were they capable of? And what had happened to Christian Matheson? The search was called off at midnight, to resume at dawn. Most of the team returned to town, but 4 of us, myself, Waylon, Easton, and Kai, remained at the ranger station nearest the search area. None of us slept much. I spent the night researching Native American legends about the Sasquatch on my phone, finding references to the creature across tribal histories from the Lumi to the Yakima. Many stories portrayed them as forest guardians, beings who protected sacred lands from human intrusion. But other accounts were darker, describing the Sasquatch as vengeful spirits who punished those who disrespected nature. As dawn approached, Waylon found me still awake, scrolling through a Warm Springs tribal history website. "You need to see this," he said, holding out a worn leather journal. It was my grandfather's. There's a section about an encounter near Mount Hood in 1958. I took the journal and began to read, sensing that whatever lay within its pages would forever change my understanding of the forest I thought I knew. The morning brought fog, thick as cotton batting, reducing visibility to mere yards. We assembled at the trailhead, a larger team now, including Christian Matheson's brother who had driven through the night from Seattle, 2 wildlife biologists from Oregon State University, and a full Sheriff's Department search team with cadaver dogs. I had spent the pre-dawn hours absorbed in Waylon's grandfather's journal. Handwritten in fading ink, it documented an encounter with what he called the people of the forest during a tribal hunting expedition. According to the account, these beings weren't animals but an ancient, intelligent species that had watched over the mountains since before the rivers changed course. Most compelling was his description of their social structure. Not solitary creatures but family groups with complex behaviors and a language of sounds and gestures. They could be peaceful, his grandfather wrote, but fiercely territorial when their domains were threatened. As the search teams were assigned quadrants, I approached Dr. Naomi Blackwood, one of the wildlife biologists. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked black hair tied in a practical braid, she had been examining casts made of the footprints I'd discovered. "These are remarkable," she admitted, turning one of the plaster casts in her hands. "The dermal ridges are consistent throughout, and the pressure differentials suggest natural biomechanics. If this is a hoax, it's extraordinarily sophisticated." "Then you believe they could be authentic?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She gave me a measured look. "I believe they're evidence of something not currently classified in zoological literature. Beyond that, I'm reserving judgment. Matheson's brother, a man named Derek with the same sandy hair as the missing camper but harder eyes, interrupted us. Are we actually entertaining Bigfoot theories while my brother is missing? He could be injured out there. We're exploring all possibilities, sir, I assured him. And we have teams searching the entire area. I want to see where his backpack was found, Derek insisted. And that structure you reported. Easton assigned me to guide Derek, Dr. Blackwood, and 2 deputies to the ravine. As we hiked through the fog-shrouded forest, I felt a growing sensation of being observed. More than once I turned to scan the trees, sure I would catch a glimpse of our silent watchers. You seem on edge, Ranger Jensen, Dr. Blackwood noted as we neared the fire lookout. These woods feel different today, I replied, unsure how to articulate the change. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place I understood intimately. Now it felt alien, the familiar transformed into something unknown. We reached the spot where Christian's backpack had been discovered. In daylight, the signs of violence were even more apparent. Not just blood, but deep gouges in the earth and bark stripped from nearby trees at a height of over 8 feet. Derek stared at the scene, his face ashen. What could do this? Before anyone could answer, one of the deputies called out from several yards ahead. I've got something here. We converged on his position. On the ground lay a hiking boot, the same brand I'd noticed in Christian's tent. It was torn and dirty, with what appeared to be blood on the laces. That's his, Derek confirmed, his voice hollow. Christian always wore morels. As we documented the find, a sound echoed through the trees, that same haunting call I'd heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the fog. The deputies drew their sidearms instinctively. What the hell was that? One demanded. They're watching us, I said, suddenly certain. They've been tracking us since we entered the forest. As if confirming my words, a massive shadow moved through the fog about 60 yards to our right, just visible enough to register as a bipedal figure before disappearing. Contact! 2 o'clock! One deputy shouted, swinging his weapon toward the movement. Don't fire, I ordered, moving between him and his target. We don't know what we're dealing with. More shadows appeared, silhouettes weaving through the mist, circling our position. I counted at least 3 distinct figures, all moving with the same fluid, powerful grace. We need to reach the ravine, Dr. Blackwood said with surprising calm. If they have a social structure as you suggested, that constructed shelter might be significant. Are you insane? Derek hissed. We need to get out of here. Your brother might be down there, I countered. And shooting will only escalate the situation. After tense negotiation, we proceeded toward the ravine, the deputies keeping their weapons ready but lowered. The fog began to thin as we descended, revealing the crude shelter more clearly than the night before. In daylight, its complexity was apparent. Not just piled debris, but an engineered structure with supports and even what appeared to be a type of thatching. Around it were scattered objects, torn fabric, bits of metal and plastic, and disturbingly, bones. Most appeared to be animal remains, deer and elk predominantly. But Dr. Blackwood knelt to examine a fragment that made my stomach lurch. Human radius, she confirmed quietly. Not recent. Years old, judging by the weathering. Derek made a choked sound, somewhere between a sob and a cry of rage. We have to find Christian. As we moved closer to the shelter, the forest fell unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through leaves. Just the sound of our breathing and footsteps on the soft earth. The entrance to the shelter was low, requiring even someone of average height to stoop. Dr. Blackwood was the first to approach, moving with the careful deliberation of a scientist aware she might be making first contact with an unknown species. Hello? She called softly. We mean no harm. No response came from within the dark opening, but a sound behind us made us all spin around. Standing at the edge of the ravine, partially obscured by a massive cedar, was the creature I had seen the previous day. In better light, its features were more distinct. At least 8 feet tall, with a massive barrel chest and powerful limbs covered in dark brown fur. Its face was a disturbing blend of human and ape characteristics. A pronounced brow ridge over deep-set eyes, A flat nose with wide nostrils, and a heavy jaw. Those eyes, amber and intelligent, surveyed us with what I could only interpret as wary calculation. The deputies raised their weapons, but Dr. Blackwood's voice cut through the tension. "Lower your guns." Slowly, remarkably, they complied, perhaps as much from shock as obedience. The creature made no aggressive moves. Instead, it raised one massive hand, palm outward, in a gesture unmistakably similar to a human signal for stop. "It's communicating," Dr. Blackwood whispered. Then the creature did something none of us expected. It spoke not in any human language, but in a series of deep modulated sounds that carried distinct patterns. After these vocalizations, it pointed deliberately toward the northeast, away from the ravine. "What's it doing?" Derek asked, his voice barely audible. I think," I said slowly, "it's telling us to go that way." The creature repeated the gesture, more emphatically this time. Dr. Blackwood nodded. "I concur. This is directional communication." "But Christian," Derek began. "Might be in that direction," I finished, a wild idea forming. "What if it's not threatening us? What if it's trying to help?" The notion seemed absurd on its face, that this creature of legend might be attempting to assist in our search. Yet as I recalled the stories in Wayland's grandfather's journal, the idea seemed less far-fetched. If these beings were indeed guardians of the forest as tribal lore suggested, perhaps they had their own form of ethics, their own response to human distress. Before we could decide our next move, more figures emerged from the forest, 3 more creatures of similar size and appearance moving to flank the first. Their posture wasn't threatening, but their presence created an unmistakable barrier between us and the path back to the trailhead. "They're hurting us," one of the deputies realized aloud. "Northeast it is," I decided, keying my radio to update Easton on our situation and new heading. As we moved in the indicated direction, the creatures paced us at a distance, always visible but never approaching too closely. They communicated among themselves with those same modulated calls, occasionally gesturing toward landmarks I wouldn't have noticed. A lightning-struck tree, an unusual rock formation. After nearly a mile, we reached a small clearing where a spring bubbled up from between mossy stones, creating a small pool before continuing as a narrow stream. At the edge of this pool, propped against a boulder, was Christian Matheson. He was alive, but barely, pale from blood loss, his legs splinted with branches and what appeared to be strips of his own torn shirt. His eyes fluttered open as Derek rushed to his side, calling his name. "The shadows," Christian whispered, his voice cracked from dehydration. "They brought water, kept the coyotes away." As Derek embraced his brother, I turned to look at our unusual guides. They stood at the edge of the clearing, watching with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. The largest one, the first we had encountered, met my gaze directly. In that moment I felt an understanding pass between us that transcended language. These weren't mindless beasts or supernatural monsters, they were something science had failed to classify, something that existed in the space between human knowledge and natural mystery. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they melted back into the forest, leaving us to tend to Christian and call in the medical evacuation team. As we waited for the helicopter, Dr. Blackwood approached me, her expression a mixture of scientific excitement and awe. "What we've witnessed today changes everything," she said quietly. "The question is, what do we tell the world?" I looked toward the trees where our guides had vanished, and considered the implications. Public knowledge of intelligent humanoid creatures would bring hordes of curiosity seekers, hunters, and exploiters to these forests. The very existence of these beings would be threatened by their discovery. "Maybe," I suggested, "some mysteries should remain mysteries." Christian Matheson was airlifted to Portland with severe injuries, a compound fracture of his right tibia, dehydration, and exposure. While his condition was listed as serious but stable, the true nature of his experience remained unclear. The official report, drafted by Easton with input from the sheriff's department, cited a fall resulting in injury, followed by wildlife interaction of undetermined nature. No mention of 8-foot bipedal creatures with intelligence and rudimentary language. 3 days after the rescue, I returned to my patrol duties, but found myself drawn repeatedly to the area surrounding the ravine where we'd found the shelter. Each time I approached, however, I found no trace of the structure or its inhabitants. It was as if the entire episode had been carefully erased from the landscape. On the fourth day, I received a call from Dr. Blackwood requesting a meeting. We arranged to convene at a small diner in Government Camp, a tiny community at the base of Mount Hood. I arrived to find her sharing a booth with an elderly Native American man whom she introduced as Joseph Riverwind, a tribal historian from the Warm Springs Reservation. "Ranger Jensen," Joseph greeted me, his weathered face crinkling with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dr. Blackwood tells me you've met the forest people." I glanced around the diner, lowering my voice. "That's not the terminology used in the official report." "No, I expect not," he replied with a knowing nod. "Government reports rarely acknowledge the Skookum, but they have been here long before there were reports or governments." Dr. Blackwood slid a folder across the table. "I've been consulting with Mr. Riverwind about the vocalizations we heard. I made recordings on my phone." She tapped the folder. "I've isolated patterns that suggest not just communication but actual language structures, phonemes, consistent syntax." I opened the folder to find spectrograms and linguistic analyses. "You're saying they have a language complex enough for grammar?" "More than that," Joseph interjected. "The sounds you heard match descriptions in our oral histories going back hundreds of years. We believe they speak the oldest language in these mountains, one that predates human settlement." I struggled to process this information. If that's true, why hasn't there been more concrete evidence? In all these years of scientific exploration, because they don't wish to be found, Joseph stated simply. And because when evidence does appear, your scientific community dismisses it. It's easier to explain away footprints as hoaxes than to rewrite textbooks. Dr. Blackwood's expression turned serious. "Cooper, there's something else you should know. Christian Matheson is awake and talking." "What's he saying?" "That he was carried to that spring after falling from a ridge. That something large and powerful but gentle splinted his leg and brought him water. That it seemed to understand his needs without him speaking." A chill ran through me as I recalled the intelligence in those amber eyes. "Have you told Easton?" "Not yet. I wanted to consult with Joseph first, and with you." She hesitated. "There's more. Christian says there was a child, a juvenile of the species. He believes they were teaching it how to interact with an injured human." Joseph nodded as if this confirmed something. "In our stories, the younger ones are curious about humans. The elders are more cautious, with good reason." "What reason?" I asked. Joseph's eyes grew distant. "In the time before Europeans came, there was understanding between our peoples. Boundaries were respected. But then came those who saw the forest only as resources to be taken, who killed what they feared or couldn't explain." He fixed me with a penetrating gaze. "There is a burial ground near what you call the Blue Mountains. The bones of many Skookum lie there, from a massacre in the 1850s. Miners who thought they were devils." The implications settled heavily on me. If these creatures had witnessed human cruelty, had preserved that knowledge across generations, their wariness made perfect sense. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Because you've been chosen," Joseph said simply. "They revealed themselves to you. That doesn't happen by accident." Dr. Blackwood leaned forward. "Cooper, we want to establish peaceful contact, documented scientific contact, but we need someone they seem to trust, or at least tolerate." "You're talking about going back out there? Seeking them out deliberately?" She nodded. "With proper preparation and respect for their boundaries. Joseph has offered to help us approach them according to traditional protocols." The proposition was professionally risky, potentially dangerous, and completely against Forest Service regulations. Yet I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward understanding these beings better. "Before you decide," Joseph said, reaching into a worn leather satchel, "there's something you should see." He withdrew a package wrapped in deerskin, unfolding it carefully on the table. Inside was a stone tablet about the size of my hand, etched with symbols I didn't recognize, and a crude but unmistakable image of a tall, fur-covered figure standing beside a much smaller human form. "This was found in a cave near the Oregon Caves National Monument in 1937, Joseph explained. "Carbon dating places it at approximately 3,000 years old." The symbols are similar to those found in other Sasquatch territories across the Northwest. You're saying they have written language too? I asked, incredulous. Not exactly. These are territorial markers, warnings, and history records. Stories carved in stone. He traced one of the symbols with a gnarled finger. This one means boundary. This one means respect. And this, he pointed to a spiral pattern, means watching. Dr. Blackwood's scientific detachment seemed to waver as she examined the artifact. If authenticated, this would be revolutionary. It has been authenticated, Joseph replied firmly. Just not by institutions that would recognize its significance. As I studied the stone, my mind flashed back to the creature's deliberate hand gesture, the way it had directed us toward Christian. The intelligence behind those actions couldn't be dismissed as animal instinct. There's one more thing you should know, Joseph said, his voice dropping even lower. Christian Matheson wasn't the first to encounter them in that area. Last year, a geology student disappeared near the same region. The official report listed it as a hiking accident, presumed dead, but a backpack was found containing this. He slid a smartphone across the table. The screen protector was cracked, but when Dr. Blackwood pressed the power button, it lit up. The battery should have died months ago, I noted. It did, she confirmed. Someone recharged it. Recently, with growing unease, I watched as she opened the photo gallery. The last images showed a series of blurry shots taken in near darkness, indistinct shapes that might have been nothing or might have been massive figures moving among trees. The final photo, however, was clear enough, a close-up of what appeared to be a hand reaching toward the camera. Not a human hand, but one covered in dark fur with fingers nearly twice the length of a man's. The timestamp on this photo, Dr. Blackwood said quietly, is 3 months after the student disappeared. Joseph gathered his artifacts, rewrapping them with ceremonial care. The forest people have watched us for centuries, Ranger Jensen. They've witnessed our wars, our growth, our destruction of their lands. They've chosen for the most part to remain hidden, but something is changing. What do you mean? Development is pushing deeper into their territories. Climate change is altering their food sources. And somewhere along the way, it seems they've made a decision. His dark eyes held mine. To reveal themselves, selectively, to those they believe might understand. As our meeting concluded, I felt the weight of an impossible choice. My rational mind still struggled with the implications of an undiscovered intelligent species living in forests I patrolled daily. Yet I couldn't deny the evidence of my own experience. That night, I called Waylon and told him everything. As the only other ranger who had witnessed the creatures firsthand, I trusted his judgment. My grandfather would say, "You've been given a responsibility," he said after listening. In the old stories, those who encountered the skookum and were allowed to leave became messengers between worlds. Messengers of what? I asked. Balance, he replied simply. Respect for boundaries. Recognition that humans aren't the only thinking beings who have claim to this land. I stared out my cabin window at the dark outline of Mount Hood against the night sky. Somewhere in those forests, the creatures were watching, waiting to see what I would do with the knowledge they had allowed me to gain. I'll do it, I told Dr. Blackwood when I called her later. I'll help you make contact, but on one condition: we do it their way, on their territory, with their consent. We approach as guests, not investigators. As I ended the call, a sound carried through my open window, a distant modulated call that echoed down from the mountainside. Whether warning or acknowledgement, I couldn't tell, but I knew I was being watched. And for the first time, that knowledge brought not fear but a profound sense of responsibility. 2 weeks passed before our expedition into what we now called contact territory was ready. Dr. Blackwood had assembled a small team: herself, me, Waylon, Joseph Riverwind, and a linguistics professor named Dr. Marcus Chen, who specialized in non-human communication patterns. Notably absent was any official Forest Service or government oversight. Easton had made it clear he wanted plausible deniability about our activities. If you find nothing, it's a routine patrol, he'd told me. If you find something, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We established base camp a quarter-mile from the ravine where we'd found the shelter. Close enough for access, but far enough to demonstrate respect for boundaries. Joseph had insisted on certain protocols: no weapons, no sample collection equipment, and a ceremonial offering of tobacco tied in small buckskin pouches placed at the perimeter of our camp. The gift acknowledges their territory and our status as visitors, he explained as he carefully positioned the pouches. It's a sign of respect that goes back generations. For the first 2 days we saw nothing. No tracks, no structures, no shadowy figures moving among the trees. The forest seemed empty of anything larger than deer and the occasional black bear. Dr. Chen spent hours each evening analyzing ambient sounds recorded by sophisticated equipment, finding nothing beyond normal woodland acoustics. On the third morning, everything changed. I awoke before dawn to find all our tobacco offerings gone, replaced by small arrangements of pine cones and colored stones that hadn't been there the night before. They've accepted our presence, Joseph said, examining one of the arrangements. This pattern, 3 stones with a pine cone pointing north, is a sign of acknowledgement. We spent that day following a careful protocol Joseph had designed, moving through the forest in non-threatening patterns, stopping frequently to leave small gifts of untreated wooden beads that Joseph had carved, and periodically playing recordings of traditional Warm Springs welcoming songs through a small speaker. Near sunset, we received our first response. A series of rhythmic knocks echoed through the forest, wood on wood, in patterns too regular to be natural. Dr. Chen's equipment captured the sequence, which he immediately began to analyze. It's structured communication, he confirmed excitedly. 3-4-2 pattern, repeated with variations. This isn't random, it's intentional signaling. Wayland suggested we respond with the same pattern. Using a pair of hardwood sticks, he replicated the sequence, his years of drumming in a local band giving him the rhythm precision needed. For several breathless minutes, silence followed. Then came an answer, the same pattern but with an additional sequence added, like a question requiring response. They're testing our ability to communicate, Dr. Chen whispered. We continued this exchange until darkness fell, the complexity of the patterns increasing with each iteration. By the time we returned to camp, Dr. Chen was beside himself with excitement. This is confirmation of symbolic thought, he insisted, reviewing the recordings. They're not just mimicking, they're building on established patterns, creating new linguistic structures on the fly. That night we maintained a watch schedule, with 2 people awake at all times. During my shift with Dr. Blackwood, a sense of anticipation hung in the air, like the charged atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "Do you think they'll show themselves?" she asked, her scientific detachment temporarily replaced by wonder. "I think they're deciding if we're worthy of that trust," I replied. Just before dawn, during Wayland and Joseph's watch, the first direct contact occurred. A large stone landed with deliberate gentleness at the edge of our camp, not thrown aggressively but placed with precision. Attached to it was a strip of cedar bark wrapped around a small object. When I emerged from my tent, Joseph was carefully unwinding the bark to reveal a crude wooden carving of a human figure, recognizable as such despite its simplicity. More remarkable was what the figure held: a miniature version of my Forest Service badge, reproduced with surprising accuracy in wood and colored clay. "It's you," Wayland said unnecessarily. "They've been watching closely enough to replicate your badge." The implications were staggering. Not just intelligence and communication, but artistic representation, symbolic thinking, and detailed observation, all hallmarks of advanced cognition. Joseph placed the carving carefully on a small cloth. "This is an invitation," he said with certainty. "They want to meet the one they've marked." "Marked?" I asked. "In their understanding, your badge is your identifier, your mark of authority. By replicating it, they're acknowledging your role and requesting formal contact." The decision was ultimately mine. Despite all our preparation, the reality of face-to-face contact with these beings, creatures of legend now proven real, was daunting. What if I misinterpreted their intentions? What if our presence triggered aggression? Yet something deeper than scientific curiosity pulled me forward. Since my first encounter, I had felt a connection to these forest dwellers, a sense that our meeting was somehow meant to be. At Joseph's suggestion, I prepared by removing my utility belt, radio, and anything that might be perceived as a tool or weapon. I would go alone to the ravine, unarmed and open. Remember, Joseph counseled as I prepared to leave. Maintain eye contact but don't stare. Keep your hands visible, and above all, show no fear. They can sense it like animals but understand it like humans. The walk to the ravine seemed both eternal and instantaneous. The forest around me was alive with morning sounds, birds calling, insects humming, leaves rustling. Yet beneath it all was a watchful silence, an awareness that I was not moving unobserved. At the edge of the ravine, I stopped and followed Joseph's instructions. 3 slow, deep breaths, then a simple spoken greeting in the Sahaptin language he had taught me, words that roughly translated to "I come in peace as a visitor to your home." For long minutes, nothing happened. I stood motionless, fighting the urge to fidget or retreat. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees across the ravine, the same massive creature I had encountered before, its amber eyes fixed on mine. It approached with deliberate slowness, movements fluid despite its enormous size. When it reached the bottom of the ravine, perhaps 30 feet from where I stood, it stopped and made a sound, not the communication patterns we had exchanged, but a deeper, more resonant vocalization that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Following instinct, I repeated the sound as best I could. The creature's expression changed subtly, a slight widening of the eyes, a tilt of the massive head. Then it did something unexpected. It sat, lowering its enormous frame to the forest floor in a cross-legged position reminiscent of a human meditation pose. The message was unmistakable, an invitation to do the same. I carefully made my way down the ravine slope and sat about 15 feet from the creature, mirroring its posture. For what seemed like an eternity, we simply observed each other. Up close, I could see the complexity of its features more clearly, the variations in its fur coloration, the wrinkles around its eyes suggesting great age, the massive yet dexterous hands resting on its knees. Slowly, deliberately, it reached to the ground beside it and picked up a stick. With careful movements, it began to draw in the soft earth between us. The lines formed a crude but recognizable outline of Mount Hood, with smaller marks indicating the location of our camp and the ravine where we now sat. I nodded my understanding, then reached for another stick. With equal deliberation, I added to the drawing a small representation of humans and Sasquatch standing together on the mountain. The creature studied my addition, then made a sound that, remarkably, resembled a chuckle. It reached out again, this time drawing a line between the figures, not separating them, but connecting them. In that moment, I understood what Joseph had meant about being a messenger between worlds. This wasn't just first contact with an unknown species, it was re-establishing a connection that had been severed by time and human development, by fear and misunderstanding. Our rudimentary drawing session continued, with increasingly complex exchanges of information. The creature indicated territories with sweeping gestures, showed migration patterns with dotted lines, and at one point drew what appeared to be historical scenes, smaller figures that I interpreted as humans encroaching on Sasquatch lands, driving them deeper into the wilderness. Finally, it drew something that made my breath catch, a representation of the modern world pressing in from all sides, with fewer and fewer spaces left unmarked by human development. The message was clear. Their world was shrinking, their future uncertain. When I returned to camp hours later, the team was fraught with anticipation. I recounted the interaction in detail, while Dr. Chen and Dr. Blackwood documented everything with barely contained excitement. "This changes the entire paradigm of anthropology," Dr. Blackwood kept saying. "A non-human intelligent species that has lived alongside us, undetected by science." "They endowed, not undetected," Joseph corrected gently. "Unacknowledged. There's a difference." Over the next 3 days, the interactions grew more complex. More of the creatures revealed themselves. 13 in total, including